Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10th anniversary conference of the European Securities and Markets Authority. Welcome to the headquarters of ESMA here in Paris. We are live. My name is Chris Burns, and I'm joined virtually during this conference by two other moderators, Anneli Tuominen, Vice Chair of ESMA, and John Riga, who is the former financial editor from Politico. Now, ESMA begins a second decade full of ambition, full of challenge. After a first decade when we were struggling out of the financial crisis, ESMA was busy restoring faith in capital markets, protecting investors by enforcing transparency. And that's what is pushing forward in the next 10 years as we look ahead, now to complete the capital markets union through better supervision. We're going to be talking about all of that today. Let's take a look at the agenda. Opening remarks by Verena Ross, Executive Director of ESMA, followed by a panel discussion on the first decade of ESMA. Then I'll have a talk with Financial Services Commissioner Mairead McGuinness. A second panel discussion after that on the future. Then remarks by David Wright, who is head of the financial services think tank Eurofi, and closing comments by ESMA Chair Stephen Mayur. A couple of tech tips for you. We are also live on ESMA's Twitter account, and you can join us by sending your questions. You see that QR code on the screen. Send your questions on that QR code, and we will take questions after each panel. And remember to tweet. Tweet hashtag ESMA number 10 years. Hashtag ESMA 10 years when you hear a good comment, a good soundbite, or if you got a good comment about what we're doing. Now, we also have an illustrator who I'd like to introduce you to, Caroline Chappell. Caroline, can you hear me? Can you turn on your mic, I think? I don't hear you right away.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me now?
There you are. Great. Yes, absolutely. I think that's
great.
That's probably the quote of the last 2 years is, can you turn on your mic?
Indeed,
right?
Indeed.
So welcome. And so as an illustrator, I've seen your work before. You're really great. What you're going to be looking for today?
Well, I'm really looking for the key points of the discussion. My job is to capture the essence and the story of what's being said today so that I can make a visual map that people can look at afterwards and see what we talked about today.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's very conceptual what we're talking about. So it's very important for you to put to your virtual pen to paper so we can sort of visualize it even better. So thank you. We're going to talk to you in a little while, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's get started. I would like to introduce you to Verena Ross, who is the Executive Director of ESMA. Verena, please, welcome. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. And good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here today and be able to celebrate 10 years of ESMA. If you had asked me when I joined on my first day what it would be like to stand here today and celebrate 10 years, I think it would have been very, very difficult to actually say what it would feel like. Looking back today to my first day at ESMA in May 2011, I have one particular picture in my mind. I had arranged to meet all the staff of ESMA. So all the about 30 people of us got together, sat very comfortably in a little conference room around a table in the old offices of Caesar, the predecessor of ESMA. This was for me the start of a fantastic journey and how things have changed since 2011. Today, for this 10th anniversary, I'm able to welcome you, as Chris said, here in the ESMA offices that we moved to just over a year ago. Even if it's only virtual, it's still fantastic to be in this brand new building. Today, ESMA also has nearly 300 staff compared to the 30 that we started with. All of them excellent, committed experts, colleagues with a cooperative, transparent, effective, and truly European mindset. Nowadays, all staff meetings are a bit harder to organize because putting all of us into a room requires us standing up in the biggest meeting room that we have here in the building. Today, ESMA has also been able to successfully deliver on the ever-growing roles and responsibilities that we've been entrusted with. Let me highlight this extraordinary journey today by just giving 2 examples of what I see as big successes for ESMA. A number of storms have hit ESMA over the years. Initially, the sovereign crisis in 2011. We had just been established, we were becoming the CRA supervisor for Europe, and we started to coordinate with national supervisors. It wasn't an easy start. And comparing that to the storm of the COVID-19 related market turmoil last spring, I think all of us involved can see the difference that 10 years have made. We now have reliable and useful data and intelligence on EU market developments. We can bring together the national supervisors in finding consistent solutions. We effectively use our direct supervision tools. And above all, we're able to collectively analyze, discuss, and act as one, as was the aim of our founding fathers and mothers when the European system of financial supervision was first established. Sticking with the shipping analogy, let me talk about the second example. When you're a captain, having the right information about weather, wind, and water depth is absolutely key. I want to briefly talk about one particular success story of ESMA related to having the right information. I feel very proud that we've been able, over the last 5 years, to build a common information and data system for the European capital markets. This has been based on excellent cooperation with the national authorities, who delegated to ESMA data collection directly from the exchanges and market participants in each national country all across the EU. This allowed us to develop, build, and now run a single European-wide database of financial instruments and transparency data. It provides one golden source of this important information, exploiting economies of scale and saving taxpayers' money by establishing just one system instead of establishing, at the time, 28, one in each country. This data allows not only the market to function better by bringing additional transparency, but also supervisors to do their job better by detecting potential market abuse and risks to orderly and stable markets. I believe these 2 examples show the journey that ESMA has undertaken and traveled over the last 10 years. It has been an amazing and, for me, personally enriching experience. Working with Stephen as the captain of the ESMA ship and with all the colleagues in ESMA and across the NCAs, in the European institutions and the wider stakeholder community. I look forward to hearing this afternoon the memories of others that have traveled the ESMA journey with us so far, but also hear the ideas of which new frontiers the ESMA ship will travel to next. Thank you very much and enjoy the ESMA 10th anniversary conference. Thank you.
Lorena, thank you so much. Have a seat with me for a sec, because I wanted to ask you something. Now, I think you are a perfect example of this staff of 300 working here, in the sense that you're a German national, you studied in Hamburg, and then you went on to work in Asia, right, in Taiwan, Hong Kong. You joined the Bank of England, then the Britain's Financial Services Authority, including the Risk Committee, very interesting as well, and then went to ESMA. I mean, that's a real Weltanschauung, if you might say, because we say that in English as well, that you have that worldview, and it allows you to think worldly and European. I think a lot of the staff here, that's how they think, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the real strengths of ESMA is its European character and the culture, the European culture that is here in each of the staff members. One of the things I enjoy most, actually, is that I meet every single new joiner at ESMA just for 15 minutes. And you get to know people from all European countries with all kinds of different backgrounds. Many of them even more internationally in terms of their background and experience
more
than
me.
You. Speaking many, many languages. That is really what is one of the rich, what makes ESMA rich is that diversity. But all of that and working and committed to actually achieving European solutions. Right. That is really what brings us together. Indeed. It's trying to really achieve the right outcome for Europe, for the European capital markets.
Right, not parochially, nationally, but European.
Exactly.
Right. Verena, thank you so much.
You're very welcome
for joining us. Now, let us move on to the first panel. I would like to move on 10 years later, ESMA, with Anneli Tuominen, Vice Chair of ESMA, who is moderating. And let me introduce you to the other members of the panel. Andrea Enria, Chair of the Single Supervisory Mechanism at the European Central Bank. Sven Giegold, Greens member of the European Parliament. You're also co-author of Finanzwende, den nächsten Crash verhindern, the finance transition, how to prevent the next crash. That's a very interesting book. Alexander Schindler, member of the Board of Managing Directors at Union Investment. Guillaume Prache, who's Managing Director of Better Finance. You represent individual investors. And Niam Maloney, who is head of the law department at the London School of Economics. Quite a high-level panel. Anneli, please, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. What an amount of expertise and wisdom in the same panel. I'm very, very lucky to be able to talk to these panelists. And Chris, if you allow me, I would first pose questions to each one of the panelists, and then we'll discuss joint topics together. If that is fine with you, Chris?
Yeah, that's fine. In fact, I might mention again, if you have any questions, please send them. We'll get to them after the first couple of rounds of questions with the panel, and that's questions to the QR code that you saw earlier, and I'll pitch the questions when we get them in. Okay?
Yes. Personally, I recall when ESMA was established 10 years ago, it was a huge change for us members as well, because earlier on, the decision making was based on consensus. And now it was formal voting, and also we started to draft binding rules. But now, may I pose my first question to Andrea? You were one of the founding, not fathers, but founding chairs of the ESAs. So, in your view, what has been the most significant change in their role in the EU financial regulatory system? Please, Andrea.
Well, I think I've mentioned 2 points. I mean, the first one is for sure the single rulebook. I mean, we have been created with a view to establish the single rulebook. I remember when I was before the establishment of the ESAs, I was at the Committee of European Banking Supervisors, and Danielle Nui at the time, I mean, one of her brainchild was the idea of supervisor disclosure. So to show in a single website all the rules and supervisory practices under the umbrella of the same directive. And it was an exercise in disclosure, of course, to show what was needed to make the framework more European, but eventually it showed that there was a Babel Tower of different rules and practices underneath the same directive. So that was the main mission given to the ESAs, and I think ESMA did an outstanding job in getting these done. But evolving through years, I think also more in-depth supervisory tasks. ESMA, of course, had the job on CRAs from the outset, then securities and trade repositories. But let's say, in general, the increasing role that the ESAs took on supervisory issues, also hitting, the ground on very hot policy topics. For instance, benchmark rates was a main topic on which, let's say, together the ESAs try to give clear focus and responses, coordinating also the national authorities. Cryptocurrencies was another area in which the ESAs actually were the first moving globally with the statements and clear guidance and information also to consumers. So I think that was also what marked the development of the ESAs through these years. And then we came, of course, to a much more, as Verena also said in her introductory remark, a much faster and more unified response in the pandemic that shows how much road has been made in creating a truly European framework. I'll leave it here, Anneli.
Thank you, Andrea. Now, as you've been chairing EBA, and now you are chairing the Supervisory Board of the SSM ECB, so what would be your advice to ESMA, how to achieve the high supervisory standards in the EU with the current structure? I mean, the structure where we have the 3 different ESAs in comparison to what you are experiencing now in your current life? That's an easy one.
Let me say, first of all, that, I'm now, chairing the supervisory board of the ECB. So I'm at the core of the banking union. The first point I would like to make is that, if you really want to have a union, you need to empower an authority that can own the responsibility, but also the tools, the instruments to really deliver the result that this union requires. And I must say that it's a genuine difference, to be really empowered with supervisory tasks here at the ECB than being at one of the ESAs, where of course, let's say, you had to always struggle with relatively weaker instruments. But now, let's say, I think that the Capital Market Union has been one of the most important projects. It's important for everybody, not only for players in capital markets. I think it's important for the functioning of the monetary union and more generally of the single market. So I think that my first point is that it would be important to recognize and attribute to ESMA a stronger role in this respect. But I must say that I think that under the leadership of Stephen and Verena, ESMA showed it. You can also go quite a long way in terms of building on the strong coordination with the national authorities and trying to really provide European answers whenever European answers are needed, which is more and more the case. So I think that it's not only an issue of voting, it's also an issue of creating a strong and joint culture around the board of the ESAs. That has been a very, very important progress which has been achieved.
I very much agree with you that you need also to have the common culture. But then, Sven, you have been around for quite a while, and you have also been following very close the financial regulatory scheme in Europe. You were one of the rapporteurs involved in the foundation of ESMA. So what is, in your opinion, do you think that the achievements of ESMA, they match the expectations, goals set? Maybe there are areas where ESMA exceeded expectations. I hope there are. And other areas where it was too restrained or was lacking tools. Please, I'm very keen to hear your views.
Well, first, I have to say I kept always a close eye on ESMA because I was the founding rapporteur. So when we set up the ESA structure, each pro-European party group got basically one report and one authority, and I got ESMA. So that was, therefore, my relationship was very special. And I would therefore like to congratulate, even for a real party, this is Zoom not the right space. It's really a pity that this party now falls victim of that corona crisis. But one has to say from the beginning, the setup of ESMA was a compromise. And it was a compromise between a European vision of a European authority and, as it's often referred to, a member-driven organization where basically the national authorities are in the driver's seat. And this has been always a political debate. So you ask me where I felt ESMA and its current leadership in particular exceeded my expectations. And I have to say, there was always one area where I found the leadership of ESMA very outspoken, and this was to stand with retail consumers. And this is something which is really a short offer, because if I listen to the member authorities, they have very often covered up high fees and inefficient distribution models. While Stephen and Verena, I've very often heard on the side of retail consumers. And this was not always matched by the ambition of the national member authorities, which wanted to protect also the companies which are basically offering in this rather inefficient distribution system. And this basic tension is ever repeating when we look at now the CMU expert group, which wants a strong capital markets union, but cannot agree on a common CMU supervisor with strong consumer protection, investor protection rules, or the Commission looking at MiFID and very much being hesitating, improving the position of retail customers. So therefore, I would say congratulations in particular to this. Where I would be much more nuanced is when it comes to the law enforcement and supervisory function. Because there, if we look at the credit rating agency market, it has not changed in the way how we wanted. So still, there is an oligopoly with super high margins, high concentration, and environmental ignorance, to put it in short. And I think this is an area where we expected more. But again, the question is this the fault of ESMA, or is it rather the fault of the law? And I think in particular, the rating agency market needs a revision of the foundation of the regulation in order to give a clearer and tougher mandate to ESMA for the next 10 years.
Yes, Annalie,
I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Sorry.
My fault. Thank you.
So ESMA has also very many different areas where it's operating. It's regulatory work, supervisory convergence, issuing sanctions, analytical work on risk, trends and vulnerabilities, and investor warnings like the one recent one on cryptocurrencies. Do you see any one of these getting more importance in the future? Also, Sven.
Well, obviously, I would say that as a rule maker, writing the rule book, Andrea said it already, there was a clear, strong performance by ESMA, and the ESAs have delivered on the rule book. The other thing is, what about violations of this rule book? And there we have a much weaker situation. So the number, Andrea knows it because I tortured him with this when he was EBA chair. How many infringements of EU law have you actually enacted? And obviously, there were many problems because the member authorities follow rather the logic, one crow doesn't pick into the eye of the other crow. And therefore, the law enforcement side was always less successful. But again, was this because the ESMA staff and their leadership didn't want to? I don't think so. I think this is because the decision-making is too little Europeanized, too many national representatives, and even the structural reform with the ESA review have not healed this problem. And obviously, one big future area will be cryptocurrencies and also new forms of violations of know your customer and market transparency with a view to AML in the payment market and also in the market infrastructure. So I believe that the whole focus on AML is very much justified, and ESMA could deliver even more in this area, and us as lawmakers have to make that clear when we vote now the new AML rules in the next 1 or 2 years.
This is an area that we could discuss the whole afternoon. Very good. Alexander, may I come to you? You as market participant who is affected by the work of ESMA, how do you think that the European fund market has developed during the last 10 years? Has it been a success story? What has been the role of ESMA? And how competitive is the European market vis-à-vis the US one?
Yeah, first of all, let me stress that I think the establishment of ESMA was the logical consequence of the introduction of the euro, of the establishment or development of euro bond markets, etc. And it definitely, from the investors' perspective, I think it took quite some time, and maybe only because of the financial crisis 2008, which obviously worked like a catalyst. The ESAs were established in a way. I think ESMA has played a very important role and has played a very positive role in, as Verena said earlier, providing European solutions. I would even say also from the international perspective. I mean, when I talk about domestic perspective, I talk about European perspective. When we talk about the international perspective and investors, what are we looking for? We are looking at in a way, one currency environment, more or less. Not all currencies are part of or all countries are part of the euro, but most of the other currencies are highly packed to the euro in a way in Europe. So you have quite a substantial investment universe in Europe. And therefore, Europe plays, I would say, still after the US market, the second most important role when it comes to liquidity, to transparency, etc. So, and all that is important to investors. Investors also need a robust and reliable regulatory framework. And I think on this, ESMA has also, I think, delivered up to expectations. But we also have to be realistic. ESMA can only be as good as on the level 2 side as the law is on level 1. And there unfortunately have also been examples where I would say the level 1 design was not ideal. For example, the LTIF regulation. The LTIF regulation, from my point of view, is in the first place was a kind of disaster. And did not really serve its purpose. And we have to avoid those. So I think it is not only ESMA's rule to supervise, but with all its talent on board, ESMA plays also an important role in advising both the Commission, the Parliament, and last but not least, I think also the national governments. So I think that within 10 years, and this is quite a short history, ESMA has delivered a lot. And let me also stress that since I also had some context with ESMA in the outbreak of the COVID crisis with regard to the liquidity and in particular the corporate bond markets, I have met open-minded, highly skilled professionals at ESMA. And I think we in Europe were much better prepared to respond to the COVID crisis, not only because of ESMA, also the ECB played an important role providing liquidity. That's definitely true. Compared to the situation in 2008, I still remember in 2008 that even the central banks started to pick up the phone and started to try to coordinate things. It really took much, much longer because it was really the first time, I would say, after Second World War that the central banks had to act together. And now I think we really have a very robust ESA network and also close cooperation between the NCAs, the local authorities, and ESMA. I would also agree with Sven to some extent that looking ahead, we have to move further and align and converge the supervision in Europe, and they're still in a later panel to be discussed. Last point of view from me is, I think ESMA has really enabled international but also domestic, meaning European investors, to use the full scale of European markets. There's still, aside from regulatory differences, there's one other obstacle, but again, this is nothing that ESMA can really tackle, and this is the tax authority of the national governments, because that is quite often an obstacle to future developments.
Yeah, that is something that is not part of our duties. Yes,
we are not going to solve it today.
No, we are not going to solve that one today. But Guillaume, may I come next to you? You are a very long-standing collaborator of ESMA, and you have been key in ESMA's contributions in order to improve the investor protection in the EU. What do you think are of the many initiatives? In your opinion, what are the most relevant ones?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And in fact, yes, I was indeed very privileged to be elected as the first chair of the ESMA stakeholder group back in 2011. I guess thanks to Neil, for example, was a member by then, and I'm still there. So people like Alexander still have to bear with me in the ESMA stakeholder group. I would fully second Sven's view on the outstanding role of ESMA on consumer protection. I could witness it during these 10 years, and it has always been at the forefront of public authorities' efforts to better protect what MiFID calls retail investors. We are indeed consumers of investment services, financial investment services. And I would say the credit goes a lot to the first chair and to the first managing director. And I would like to take this opportunity for me to salute their tenure work and to thank them dearly for that. If I could mention some key contributions following all these years, I remember first the creation and the development of the stakeholder groups. I must say ESMA has always made a constant effort to balance these stakeholder groups. It is not easy to find a sufficient number of independent, active user-side experts. And I can witness that it's been trying hard and continues to try hard. If still we don't have a full balance between user side and industry side, but it is quite strong now, and hopefully it will improve further. Also, we can see I could witness the personal involvement of the chair and the managing director for making these stakeholder groups work. They spend a lot of time and effort, of course, with board members as well, like Anneli, but they were always there with us. They also contributed, like Andrea and Gabrielle, to create this once-a-year consumer day, which was very much appreciated because that's reaching out to consumers who don't have, of course, the resources, the time, to interact so much with the public authorities. I think MEPs know that well as well. And in terms of concrete improvements, I could cite a lot, but maybe I will just mention a few, like the guidelines on securities lending by UCITS funds back in 2012. These guidelines require that all the net profit from securities lending goes back to the fund investors. I would also like to mention the start of the work of ESMA in 2016 on closed indexing, starting with a study, but more recently publishing, for example, last year, guidelines on benchmark disclosures, which have a lot to do with closed indexing, but of course have a broader scope, guidelines on performance fees, and also, as soon as the ESAS reform was enacted in 2018, the ban of binary options. And ESMA was extremely quick to do that once it had the legal capacity to do it. So again, a lot of things on UCITS funds disclosure. It's a bit a pity that this might go to the dustbin soon, because this UCITS key information, investor information document will be no more soon. Also, and I think Sven mentioned that a bit, referring to the often high fees in the industry. I could witness, and Sven mentioned this high-level forum on the Capital Market Union. There also we could find a very active ESMA chair who was in favor of pushing for reducing conflicts of interest in the investment advice area, what Gabriel Bernardino calls kickbacks. I would just like to end, Anneli, if I just have a few seconds, that so there are many contributions. Maybe the limits to the effectiveness of ESMA in consumer protection is first that ESMA is competent only for about a fifth of households' financial savings, which is basically listed securities and bonds and funds direct. But 80% of their financial savings are elsewhere and do not always benefit from the same rules and same protections and same implementation. That's the first limit. The second limit, some people already mentioned, is of course, but that is natural. I would say it's constrained by level one, and sometimes level one is not so good. By the way, the ESAS reform of 2018 allows now ESMA to send some proposals or some recommendations to the level one, being an expert practicing the implementation of level one. And last thing, I think that was mentioned as well, is the problems, the challenge of supervisory convergence, which comes partly from the governance of ESMA being supervised by the people it is supposed to supervise. So this was tried to be addressed, but is not fully addressed. But again, it's not, of course, ESMA's role. And one last thing where I think it could be done better in the future is when it's consumer protection regarding people who invest directly in securities markets. When there was CSAR, we were named market participants. I was considered a market participant. With ESMA, we are no longer considered in the market participant category. We are in the consumer category. But too often, ESMA has been a bit forgetting that we are still market participants. For example, on the recent consultation on market data, and in the Wirecard case, where who is going to foot the bill, like the usual, it is us pension savers who had invested directly or indirectly in Wirecard shares. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume. Well, it was quite a few topics that you mentioned. And of course, your work at the stakeholder group has very much contributed to the work of ESMA. And I think that it's really mutually extremely beneficial. So, you've been also following ESMA's evolution over the last 10 years. And what do you think is ESMA's role in promoting capital markets union, and have we done enough in order to promote retail investor participation and or the growth of SME markets? What's your view?
Thanks, Annalie. And yeah, it was a huge privilege to be with Guillaume in that first group. And just to note here, I remember so strongly that really powerful sense of collective mission and of sort of getting serious problems, resolved for the European capital market. And I think it's a huge credit to ESMA that has retained that the whole way through. So there are big questions, Annalise, so capital markets union, SMEs and retail investors. I think what we see here is ESMA facing really big challenges, many of which are not directly within its control, as a lot of other members have kind of this panel have mentioned. ESMA is working in a pretty confined space with the kinds of powers it has, with the mandates it has in the wider political environment. And I think within those constraints, I think it's done a really powerful job. And I think I'd make a first point, which is, I think ESMA has been brave and courageous and innovative in using the powers it has. Yeah, so for example, in the supervisory convergence area, broadly speaking, a sort of a toolbox of soft law. But if we look back over the 10 years and what ESMA has done with that in terms of guidelines and FAQs and so on, all kinds of workshops, all kinds of interventions, these are not just boring plumbing. If we speak to Capital Markets Union, what does Capital Markets Union need? It needs trust and confidence by regulators and market participants, right? How do you build that? It's ensuring a strong rule book that is clear, but also clear for the market, clear for supervisors. And that's where something sort of that has a plumbing quality like supervisory convergence is so important. We won't have a capital markets union unless we understand the rules, unless we know how to supervise them. So that's a really powerful role ESMA has played in using its supervisory convergence tools in a very sort of innovative way. And if I may give one example, Annalie, if we all think back to the 3rd of January 2018, okay, probably the most important event for Capital Markets Union, the go live of MiFID II and MiFIR. That is, in so many respects, our template for how the market space for CMU works. Now, the world didn't end on the 3rd of January, although there were some predictions that it might. And one of the reasons it didn't was because of that really serious ramp up that ESMA engaged in terms of ensuring practices, procedures, bugs had been kind of shaken out of the system. We had guidance where we needed it. We might have suspended some rules with with the NCAs agreeing to supervisory forbearance on certain issues. But that was absolutely fundamental. Now, I think ESMA, obviously CMU is an incomplete project, clearly. But there's a much wider space there that, everybody has to pick up, I think, whether it's direct investors or politicians or the market itself. But I think ESMA's played a really powerful role in creating those fundamental conditions and we'll still have a lot to do there. Secondly, going to the trust and confidence piece, this time last year, there's a very strong political mood to encourage CMU. But let's imagine back in Q1 and Q2, there had been serious difficulties in supervision in the European financial market. That would have done long-standing damage to trust and confidence in CMU. So ESMA's ability with its NCAs to come to collective decisions on operational questions, I think, was fundamentally important. Going to the retail investor side, I very much agree with Guillaume on this. I think that ESMA has been a powerful champion of retail investors. I think it's a difficult job, isn't it? It's sort of, on the one hand, protecting, but on the other hand, somewhat subtly, if inviting is the wrong word, certainly making clear that capital markets can be a safe place in which to put savings. I think right from the start, ESMA, whether it's through its guidance or through its product intervention powers, I think it's made clear to European investors there is a champion. And this is one of the questions we have. Where is the champion of the retail investor in the wider space in Europe? And I think ESMA has stepped into that, has made quite clear, we do have the back of the European investor. And similarly with SMEs, I think clearly there's a big issue here about the burden of regulation. But I think ESMA has always been very careful to be proportionate and evidence-based in how it builds the rule book. So I would say has done a huge job, clearly much to do, but within its role has done a very, very effective job.
What I very much appreciate in your saying that what we do needs to be evidence-based, that it's not just an opinion, but it's based on fact and proper analysis. Well, ESMA has really been tested in many crises and it has been sailing through the crisis pretty well. But in your opinion, has ESMA been able to respond? Are actions towards supervisory convergence even more important in times of crisis, or should we take more into account market relevant factors, as we saw in short selling bans? And in your opinion, is there a good balance between the focus on stability on one hand, then orderly markets, and investor protection and disclosure issues? What should be the focus of course, the next panel will discuss the future, but what's your view now? So anybody can intervene, please? I cannot hear you now.
I don't know, if you want, I can start maybe with a few reflections. I'm not a securities regulator, but still, let's say,
almost.
I remember when the ESAs were established, and I was reading for the first time the founding regulation. One of the articles that puzzles me the most was the article on emergency powers, because I thought, well, I mean, this is framed in such a way that it will never be used. And indeed, it has never been used. So, and at the time, I was very skeptical, thinking that, in times of crisis, I remember, I will not mention the scene, but not the sinner. I remember a time around a supervisory table before the establishment of the ESAs, when it was clearly said, when the crisis was starting, when somebody said clearly, well, when there is a crisis, it is up to the national authorities to play ball, and so pushing aside attempts to have a more coordinated response to the crisis. So I was very, very afraid that this would have been the case. And I must say that to some extent, I think ESMA in particular, all the ESAs proved that even without a strong legal basis, you can be quite effective in responding to challenges, to crises, and to to be in the right place, to take a leading role. I think also on an international basis there is a lot of demand for having a sort of European counterpart, to engage with when there are tensions in global markets. So I think that the ESMA, the ESAs have been very instrumental to to move the European Union ability to respond to crises, to shocks, to a different stage. I already mentioned before. Let's say if we take the start of the pandemic in March last year, 1 year ago, I think that it is maybe the first time that European authorities were basically the first kids on the block, in terms of providing responses very well coordinated between ECB, the three ESAs, the Commission, everything on the same line. Good consultations, documents that were talking to each other, and clear messages sent to all market participants across the board. Second point I would like to mention is that again I was raised as a supervisor under the mantra, let's say, that that there was a tension, even a trade-off to some extent between the pursuit of transparency and the pursuit of stability, and the two things go into conflict, especially at times of crisis. The lessons I learned during the great financial crisis taught me exactly the opposite. I mean, I remember when I joined the EBA in the times in which the sovereign debt crisis was putting pressure on funding markets for banks, I was engaging in dialogue with market analysts, with investors, trying to understand what was driving investors away from European banks. And the response in most cases was very clear and simple. I mean, we don't have reliable information to assess the quality of the bank's balance sheets. We don't have a single definition of non-performing loans. We look at we try to compare and contrast balance sheet of different banks across the board, and we are unable to really do this. You go to the US, we have full disclosure available regularly on the websites of the authorities. We download this data, we run our programs, and we can make our best estimate of where things are going to be difficult or maybe easier across different players. So I really realized that actually more disclosure is important for stability of the sector, and I think that ESMA was championing, let's say, an enhancement in disclosure, enhancement in comparability of data, and dissemination of information. And I think this has been of great value, not only for, let's say, having efficient markets, but also for having stability in the European Union. And I think that this is an important achievement. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
And more disclosure based on reliable data. Of course, that is the key, that the data is reliable and that is in everybody's interest. Anybody else would like to comment?
Yeah, maybe I can just add to what Andrea just mentioned. I think coming back to your questions, there has to be, from my point of view, a certain balance between, let's say, consumer protection and the development of the capital markets on the other side. And from time to time, one will be more important, and there will be topics which Sven and Guillaume have mentioned, where we still have to move ahead with regard to consumer protection or consumer interest. And even for institutional investors, most of them are entrusted with the money of European individuals. So it's not their own money. So a lot has to be done. I'm surprised one of the biggest challenges, I think, which ESMA was challenged with during the last few years, has not been mentioned. And I think ESMA played a fantastic role, which was the Brexit. The development of Brexit, the basically separation of the UK market, the UK industry. I mean, just we all are aware of the fact that most of the financial institutions are located in the UK. So all by the sudden, the European authority was without direct impact on, let's say, the most important financial center, at least for the time being, for Europe. And I think even in that regard, ESMA played an important role and has raised its profile during that period, because I was often approached by international investors, in particular from Asia, who really were asking what is going to happen now. And they were all referring to ESMA's action and statements by Stephen and Verena and others with regard to the ability to not only invest in Europe, but also provide services to European investors, etc. So very important task, I think, during the last 4 or 5 years.
It was maybe mentioned because everything was running so smoothly and ESMA handled the situation so professionally. So maybe that's the reason. May I ask you one more question, and that is about disclosure, disclosure to retail. Because I think that all retail investors, they would expect compact, easy to understand information on which they could base their decision making. Now, as we know, the regulatory initiatives have been further complex. We know the PREEPS saga, we know the future performance and past performance and cost discussion, and we know that when it comes to sustainable finance, the disclosure requirements are really exhaustive. So, we also understand the Commission intends to improve the current disclosure framework to improve consumer engagement, digital delivery, and interaction with key information. So what would your advice be to the Commission, how to sort out these disclosure questions in the future? Because if I was an investor, I wouldn't love to have very detailed information. I would like to concentrate on the core issues. Please. Yes, Sven. Sven, please.
Well, first, Anneli, I have to applaud one of your best jokes I've heard so far. I like Finnish humor a lot, and to say that Andrea is almost a security supervisor is just a great joke. But I have to defend Andrea because he's on the side of the SSM and not on the monetary side. So the monetary side is holding all the securities. However, but on substance, I think actually, to be a bit provocative again, there's already too much disclosure. So all the material investors get on paper or in electronic form will not be read. And why is this? Because we disclose a lot of material because we don't want to do what Stephen said in the beginning when ESMA was formed, to build a market structure which leads to advice, which is true advice and not sales, so that in particular retail consumers get advice which is on their side, which recommends them the products which they need in perspective of their time horizon, their risk appetite, and the returns they want. And therefore, we have replaced a good market structure by disclosure. And now, ironically, exactly those lobbies which didn't want to change the distribution model, so the market structure, are now complaining about all the disclosure mechanisms. What is the Commission now doing while we discuss MiFID reform? They want to create, based on a French-German proposal, a special group of consumers, which are actually the more profitable retail consumers, which will get less disclosure. And again, they don't want to change the market structure, which we really urgently need, so that people get efficient products recommended and efficient for those who save rather than for those who sell them. And that is our basic problem. And then on Sunday, we complain about poverty and low income at old age. And this issue has to be set straight when we build and complete the CMU and reform MiFID. And I'm sure that will be a big debate. And I know already whom I'm seeing again in that debate. That is Guillaume. But that is for sure. And I think there we really need to get it better. And if the financial sector wants a more efficient distribution model with less paperwork, they should help us setting the market structure more in the interest of retail customers.
Anneli, Sven, I need to jump in here. I'm so sorry, but we need to start to move to our questions from the viewers. It is time for the questions, and you can see the QR code up there on the screen, hopefully, that you can use to send your questions in. What Sven was talking about, we could proceed with, but let's get to a couple of the viewer questions. And if things, if we don't get a whole lot of questions, we can go back to the battery of questions you have still, Anneli. We could continue this, but we only have about 20 minutes left. So let's get to the first one. Supervisory convergence is seen as being an innovative approach to ensuring the development of a level playing field across the EU. However, we have also seen it being used as a crisis response mechanism. But is it fit for this purpose, or does ESMA require further powers? Who would like to answer that? Does ESMA need further powers?
That's a tricky question.
Yeah. Neve, how about you, Neve?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I'd answer it in this way. I mean, building agencies is the art of the possible. We have to progress in line with political, legal, market conditions. And it seems to me it's a very long journey to get to something, and we all automatically start talking about the SEC and all the rest of it. But if we can get the job done in smaller increments, I think that's what we focus on. And I think supervisory convergence has shown us that it's a pretty resilient tool in crisis conditions. So yeah, it's not form of direct intervention. But given where we are right now in Europe and the state of market development, it seems to me that supervisory convergence gets us quite a bit of the way. I mean, if I was to kind of make a plea for one kind of harder power for ESMA, it would be the ability to suspend rules where they're clearly not working, or where there's a data problem with the rule, or there's an issue with the CCP, or there's some kind of issue with the binding rules that ESMA could suspend it where necessary. But I think supervisory convergence does get us quite a bit of the way, while avoiding some very, very big questions that are going to take time to resolve.
Guillaume, what do individual investors think about that?
Well, I think Sven made a reference to this discussion at the high-level forum on the Capital Market Union, that it failed to agree on proposing more, I would say, real steps towards single supervision of capital markets. And I agree with that, because if you want to have a capital market union, how can you have a fragmented supervision?
Indeed.
For us, it's not only a question of liquidity and of strengthening the EU economy, to have, for example, our unicorns not flee to New York Stock Exchange or to Asia instead of being listed in Europe. But it's also a question to have only one standard of investor protection. And the Wirecard case shows that it's still very difficult for ESMA. ESMA has reacted very quickly. Back in July, they have already published something or advised something to the Commission. But it's, and I'm not saying this because we have two Germans on the panel, but it's been quite a challenge to find a consistent approach, and it still is.
Okay, can I go to question two?
We are in favor of more single supervision.
Okay, can I move to question two, unless anyone else has a comment there? Financial regulation has become progressively more complex over the last years. How can we ensure that retail investors, whose participation in financial markets we want to encourage and support, are able to see through this complexity and understand the basic principles that impact their investment? Who would like to answer that one? Perhaps Alexander?
Very short. It's
okay.
Impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible for a retail investor, and to be in all fairness. I mean, Guillaume and his organization is representing definitely consumers. But if you would ask the individual consumer in how far he or she really understand capital market products and the information provided, and let's say the governing regulations, I think we would be totally misleaded if we would believe that people understand.
Yeah, Sven, haven't you pushed for more clarity and simplicity for individual investors?
Well, I first of all believe that there are lots of individuals who don't want to become finance experts.
Yeah.
And there are some people around who believe we need a new form of re-education. In Germany, we made very bad experience during socialism with this. Or so-called socialism, but there are also some, they claim it's all a question of financial knowledge and financial education. So basically you have to re-educate citizens as financial experts. So there are people who would love to become financial experts, and they should get all they need for this. But beyond that, there needs also for consumers access to the capital markets who don't want to become these financial experts. And I would like to praise again the Swedish model. So the Swedish model is very simple. You save a part of your wage. You can go for one of the funds like the ones offered by Alexander. But if you don't want to become someone who judges which ones, you get to a default fund. And the default fund is managed publicly with a cost ratio of 0.18% per year, not the 2% Alexander's funds are charging regularly consumers per year on the wealth administered. And I think ESMA should continue to speak in favor of models which have 0.2% rather than 2%, from a consumer point of view. And that is our challenge in order to help consumers to get access to the advantages of capital markets. It's not the transparency model in this is fine for some people, but for everyone, there has to be a simple and easy and efficient, profitable and cheap access to the capital market. And this has to be regulated in MiFID, and it should be supported by financial authorities.
Yeah, MiFID is all about transparency. Another question here I got in, what should the EU do to create a real capital markets union, CMU? Which key steps should be taken? Andrea, you were talking about that yourself, right?
Well, again, I mean, I think that, let's say, it is important. The institutional structure is important. I mean, my perception now, being, let's say, involved in the banking union, is that if you want a union, you do need to have some sort of single supervisor. I mean, it's very difficult to have a union with, even though, as Neem was saying, I mean, convergence in practices can lead you some way. I mean, eventually, if you really want a genuine union, I think you do need to do the last step and move further. That's my strong belief. More generally, let's say we are moving from a financial market which is strongly focused on bank intermediation, and we want to move to a financial market in which capital markets play a greater role. If you need to do that, I think that let's say the idea to start with securitization was the right one. You need to have tools that manage to transform loans into marketable, let's say, instruments in a safe and transparent and standardized fashion. And this was, heralded as a sort of low-hanging fruit when the Capital Market Union project started.
Right.
I think it's a pity that we didn't manage to achieve much progress in restarting this market on a stronger basis so far.
Okay. Anyone else like to jump in on that?
Chris, may I make a quick comment?
Sure,
I think the issue of nomenclature here, we talk about capital markets union, but that's phenomenally advanced. We should really be talking about market finance in the EU, which is about building market finance structures in the individual member states. Like the union cross-border piece is part of this, but there's a lot of really fundamental work that needs doing at national level. And I think part of that is ensuring our complex financial market rules are sufficiently calibrated so that SME finance and so on at local level can easily access markets.
Okay. I'd like to move on to the next question. We got about 10 minutes left, I think. The ultimate convergence is centralization of direct supervision. Does the panel see room for more direct supervisory tasks? And if so, in which areas? Who would like to comment on that?
I can start if you want.
Okay, yep.
As I said, I think for a capital market union, you need a more single supervision. ESMA is already a direct supervisor for credit rating agencies. I think one area where it would be quite needed is in the other main indices and ratings, especially for sustainability. Because the big challenge for the professionals, but also for the citizens, as we said, it's already, and I agree with Sven, it's already quite difficult and too complex right now. Products are too complex. In fact, ESMA has in its legal remit to promote simplicity, and that's maybe one area where it did not succeed so well. So for ratings and indices regarding sustainability in particular, I believe it would help because it is extremely challenging that now we are asking not only consumers, but the financial experts, for example, the Alexanders of this world, not to be only financial experts, but to be experts in environmental science, in energy efficiency, and things like that. Is it really realistic?
Okay. Anyone else like to add to that? I have another question here.
Well, I
yes,
think
Sven.
on this direct supervisory tasks, to me it seems central. ESMA has also now the role on the CCPs, but there's more of market infrastructure. And it would be logical to give the whole market infrastructure basically supervisory tasks to ESMA for a capital markets authority. And I would like also to point out one issue. The MiFID is full of talk about the consolidated tape. A real consolidated tape would bring real lower transaction costs and market transparency. So this has been resisted by national authorities and actors. It would be logical to get ESMA a special role in bringing down the barriers in this area with the reform of MiFID, and this is very high on my list.
What about some other reform? The accounting scandals. Here's another question. The accounting scandals 20 years ago in the U.S., such as Enron, led to a significant legislative changes and regulatory overhaul in form of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Does Europe need a fundamental rethink of the legal requirements and regulatory overhaul to be able to prevent and manage accounting and auditing scandals in the future, like Wirecard? How much of a rethink do we need on this? Sven, go ahead.
Well, I would be curious to hear Andrea first on the subject, and then I will. I would love to comment.
Andrea, would you like to take it away?
Well, indeed, let's say, first of all, let me say that as prudential supervisors, let's say, we try to go quite deep in the accounts of banks and try to, work also on the quality of assets, on valuations, and it is a real challenge. But indeed, I think that in my view, let's say, further progress in the area of accounting and auditing regulations would be needed, would be warranted. We still see, being European supervisors, a number of different practices across the union in the banks under our responsibilities, and this is an area in which ESMA, if empowered with direct responsibilities, I think could promote major progress in my view.
Okay, Sven, briefly, please.
Well, very briefly, I would say Europe can learn a lot from US corporate accountability rules. So, for instance, liability is higher. Also in the UK, liability is higher. Also, which you cannot so easily insure away. And therefore, I think there should be more direct liability of those in corporate governance. And when it comes to the audit market, this needs structural reform. And also there, the UK is stronger. One has to say, with the view of Wirecard, which certainly triggered the question, ESMA has delivered very quickly a report, but unfortunately it got it wrong before when covering BaFin's short selling ban. Unfortunately, ESMA was not opposing this, but rather supporting this wrong move by BaFin.
Okay, we have to leave it there. I'm so sorry. We have another question here, but it's also a looking forward question that we could save for the next panel, which is supposed to be looking forward. Anneli, I think we had a good talk, didn't we?
Yes, and I think that we could have continued the whole evening, because with this panel, all their expertise, we can just listen to them for hours. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all the speakers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Really great. Really great to talk. And let's move on. Let's see what all of your talk has inspired Caroline Chappell, our illustrator, to draw. Caroline, what you got?
Hi, Chris. Right, let me show you. So We've obviously had a fantastic discussion talking about so many different things.
Yeah, look at that.
We really
Wow.
did a great amount of talking about at the top layer about the things and the achievements from ESMA, from the building strong and common cultures, helping to do that, increasing the supervisory role, that single rule book, important piece, and then a lot about the investor protection, where we're really doing great roads, and also this idea that ESMA faces challenges that it doesn't always have the power to resolve, but where it has
circumstances beyond its control, right?
Yeah, brave and courageous and innovative in how it has used those, and then really talking about how it's responded here in the bottom quarter to the crises and various conflicts and challenges.
Including COVID and the Brexit effect. It's all in there. Wow, it's quite comprehensive, I would say.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think this is you're going to embellish this later, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is the rough and raw draft, and I will be building a whole picture of the event for people to see afterwards that pulls all those themes together.
I would say that's a very nice, quick and dirty, really. It's
yes,
good. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, Carolyn, we'll get back to you after the second panel, right?
Fantastic.
We'll see you then. Okay. And thanks so much for all your questions. We're taking a fireside chat now, a virtual fireside chat with Mairead McGuinness, the EU Commissioner for Financial Services. I'm going to read out the whole title: Financial Services, Financial Stability, and Capital Markets Union. So that's very, very key. Mairead, I see you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. I hope you can see and hear me clearly, and lovely to be with you. I caught some of your earlier panel discussions, so it was nice to hear all the different views, and as I say, I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon.
That's great. And yes, so you've heard that talk about Capital Markets Union and about the European supervisory authorities, how much power they should have, including ESMA being one of them. How far have we come in these last 10 years? Let's look back for a minute before we look forward, because that's going to be the next panel. How far have we come in building these safeguards against another crisis? How much safer are we now?
Oh, I think there is no comparison to where we were before the previous crisis. And in one sense, I think the financial system is invisible to us when it's working. We take for granted that everything functions. It is only when there is a problem that we realize how important regulation is. And therefore, the role of ESMA over these past 10 years has been key to this, if you like, inspiring confidence in our whole financial markets. And indeed, that's the theme of today's conference. So we've come a long way. And if you reflect on the beginning, the early day ago, and I think at this point I should thank, lest I forget, both Stephen and Verena. But if you look back over 10 years, ESMA was, if you like, literally having to form itself. It was a small agency, limited powers. Today it is an important agency with strong powers. Clearly it has increased in size, but that reflects the realities of needing to keep confidence in our financial markets and keep up to date with things that evolve. And I suppose for all supervisors and regulators, we know that nothing is fixed in time. Nothing will be perfect over time unless we constantly check, review, and reform. So I think over the 10 years, ESMA has done an incredible job of work. We should thank it for the fact that even in this phase where we have a public health crisis, we have managed, if you like, around stability. And I think in terms of the Capital Markets Union, a single market for capital, the role of ESMA is and will continue to be absolutely vital. Look already at what it is doing and has done in terms of technical advice, which is really important, but regulatory standards, technical standards, all of the advice we would receive, questions and answers when people are asking for more details, and also the digital legislative rule book and the registers which are available on ESMA's website. So I think that, this is an important, if you like, reflection on 10 years of work. I wonder, can any of us predict what the next 10 years will bring? And that's why we need to be ever conscious, alert and aware of changes and be ready for these changes in advance.
Indeed. Yes, and this the panel that we just had, we were talking about what more powers these supervisory authorities should have. What is the next step? I mean, we see CCP Supervisory Committee, Central Clearing Parties, part of EMIR derivatives, EMIR dealing with derivatives, MiFID dealing with transparency. So how much further should we strengthen this authority that ESMA has in enforcing through more transparency?
I think if you talk about what's important, I think for me it is that we have greater convergence across the European Union. The reason we don't have fully fledged capital markets union is because we have fragmented capital markets. So the idea of having supervisory level, European level supervisory is really important to develop and deepen our capital markets. So that is one issue that's clearly important. You mentioned a particular issue, quite technical, but clearly really important, that since the end of last year, if you like, ESMA has now got responsibility under EMIR 2.2 for the beginning of last year, apologies, for the whole if you like, look at CCPs, and these are parts of the financial infrastructure that, if they weren't functioning properly, would lead to great instability. So they supervise the very systemically important CCPs. That's a huge part of their work, ensuring supervisory convergence on aspects of these EU CCPs and how they are supervised, and looking at foreign CCPs and taking a view as to those that pose a systemic risk or not. And they have a supervisory committee on new these CCPs, equally and in parallel, and will link to the area of our, if you like, working group around stakeholders in relation to CCPs following Brexit, because we do have a need to look at the financial architecture in the European Union since Brexit. Interesting, because of the work of all of the regulatory authorities, that there was no disruption in the marketplace around financial markets at the beginning of this year when the transition period ended, and really that's down to the fact that preparations were made, so things were quite smooth. We are now in a phase with the United Kingdom where we have time to set up a regulatory framework where we can have discussions in the form of an MOU. And then we need to look at pieces of the financial architecture, clearly with a European perspective, what we might need to do, and the UK, I'm sure, will take a view itself. So having the advice and the work that ESMA does, including the work in parallel that we have with this working group, will be really helpful to us to make some key decisions around whether there are reasons that we might want to move some of the infrastructure into the European Union, whether there are systemic risks, and whether their challenges and opportunities are balanced. We need to take a very broad view. And that's why when we moved into this period of Brexit being a reality, we are in a good place because there was no instability in the markets, and that has given us time to reflect.
But we're not at this financial cooperation forum yet, right? That's in the works. And at the moment, I mean, I saw an interview where you said that we're having informal engagements for now, but how much longer can that last? And we do have to, as you said, we have to have a framework, we have to have a structure. When's that coming?
Oh,
for
look,
Brexit. I'm talking about Brexit, right? Yeah.
The news around the Memorandum of Understanding, which is part of what was included in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement signed off at the end of last year. We have a commitment on both sides to agree this memorandum. We've had good work going on at services level, but it is very much, if you like, a structure in which we will work. So already we are making good progress. We're hoping to have all of that completed by the end of this month, and I think we can achieve that. I mean, as you know, Chris, there have been lots of other issues around Brexit, which are part of a mood music, if you like. We have managed in this area to make sure that at the services level we can continue to do work around the memorandum. And the next step will be moving into the detail. As you say, how long can we wait? I mean, there is no rush. I would say two things around this. Firstly, of course, we respect the UK's decision, and they're now a third party, a third country, if you like. So we have a different relationship, but clearly London remains a major financial centre.
Right.
But we have to take our own decisions around the future. And I have been very clear with my UK friends that we will not be recreating access to the single market for the United Kingdom because they've chosen to move out. Equally, I know the United Kingdom wants to be their own rule maker, full respect for that, and we would clearly continue to be our rule maker. And I've also been very clear to say that, you know, you cannot have divergence and equivalence. In other words, we have to be very mindful of how the UK might diverge in the future, while also acknowledging that we will be changing some of our legislation financial area as well. So with those kind of caveats, I think we can and will look at particular issues, but there won't be a moment like there was with the trade agreement where we will be sitting down and announcing a big package.
Okay.
I see it more on a case-by-case basis where we will consider various issues. And as I said, while there is perhaps one or two issues that there might be some pressure points on, there isn't that great urgency, which allows us time to do the right thing. And I think that is understood on the UK side. You've seen already the share trading has moved to Amsterdam because it needed to move to the EU. And these are the inevitable consequences of Brexit. I know the City of London will have some concerns about Brexit, and indeed probably still does. But look, we have to just deal with the realities that we are in. Brexit has happened, it has consequences.
I've got barely 5 minutes left, and I want to get to two other priorities you have is sustainable finance and digital finance. Can you talk a little bit about both? On sustainable finance, we know that there are these non-financial reporting directive. There is this effort, the responsibility given to ESMA to get companies to come clean about talking about their environmental and social and governance aspects, right? So there's an effort there. How far along are we, and where are we going with that?
This year is a really significant year around sustainable finance and digital as well. I think COVID has, if you like, accelerated the whole digitalization of our economies and society. But particularly on sustainable finance, ESMA has had a really important role in helping shape policy and rules around sustainable finance. So if you like, we're trying to green the financial system and then make sure that the money flows towards green. So it's a double-edged discussion. And how we're doing that is trying very hard to identify in our taxonomy on sustainable economic activities the areas which are sustainable. So that's already a work in progress. We have published the draft delegated acts. Again, we'll have some feedback around that. And equally, we will be asking the corporates and business to start reporting not just on financial, which they do, but non-financial issues around climate, the impact the company has on climate at the external level, but equally how climate might impact on the company. And
because,
this is
because investors, a lot of investors are demanding that anyway, right?
I mean, this is the point. There is a real pressure from the investor community around sustainability. They want information. I think there's also a real demand from companies as to what information they should supply. And I think the key for me, when we put the jigsaw together of all the, if you like, tools we will have in place by the end of this year, is to make sure that they are coherent, that they don't overburden business, but that they give clarity around what is green, why we need to move away from sustainable activities, because at the end of the day, we have very tight deadlines. We have to reduce our emissions by at least 55% in 9 years. That is quite a challenging target.
That's very fast,
and climate neutrality by 2050. Briefly on digital, as you say, it is the future. So ESMA's role in this is as key as it is around sustainable finance. And maybe with digital, there are different risks, different challenges, but also opportunities as well. So it's interesting that at this point, where we are dealing with a public health crisis, we are also looking towards a recovery that is not the status quo recovery, but a recovery that takes account of both the sustainable, the green, if you like, and also this digital transformation. So I think the last 10 years have probably been quite busy for ESMA, but I think the next 10, and starting with this one, if you like, will also be quite busy and refocusing.
Mairead, can I get a quick comment from you? I got 1 minute left, and I'd like to ask you, related to the digital, is crypto crypto assets. Can you comment quickly on that? I know ESMA has been called on to scrutinize what's going on as far as that is.
Well, look, this is evolving faster than even the conversation. What's really interesting is I've had discussions with schools where the teachers are telling me a lot of students, teenagers, are aware of this market and they think it's risk-free. And I think that's why we do need ESMA to look at this. But we're also, as you know, looking at digital euros. So I think that we are mindful that the evolution is in this direction.
That's right.
But equally that there are risks to every opportunity. There is a risk attached to it. So stable coins, cryptocurrencies, large tech companies wanting to launch their own form of a stable coin. These are issues which are absolutely on our agenda. They will not go away. We have to deal with them, but we need information analysis. And that's why we need the expertise of ESMA to help us make those right decisions around many issues, but particularly, rightly as you point out, this whole digital future.
The genie's out of the bottle, right? We got to deal with it. Mairead McGuinness, thank you so much, Financial Services Director at the European Commission. Thank you so much, Mairead.
Yes, and thank you. And well done to ESMA for marking, surviving, and doing good work over 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Mairead. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.
All right, let's go and look forward. Let's pitch all of this forward to our next panel, which is called The Future for European Capital Markets. And the moderator is John Riga, ex-financial director of Politico. And let me remind people about tech tips, the questions you can send in via the QR code. Remember the hashtag, ESMA 10 years. Speakers, make sure to look in the camera when you're talking. And I'm told for those who are clicking onto the Zoom broadcast to click onto the main window if there's any confusion there. So I think that does it. We'll get to the questions after a couple of rounds with the panel. John, take it away. It was great to work with you at Bloomberg News in the depths of the financial crisis. We were dealing with that, watching the two Jean-Claudes, Trichet and Juncker, dealing with that at ECOFIN, at ECB, and they managed to navigate us out of it. But these regulatory agencies are now, or these supervisory authorities, it's now their job to shed more light on the whole situation, bring more transparency, right, John?
Yeah, we're in a different world since then, Chris, but it's good to have the, you bring back the warm, fuzzy memories, actually. This whole thing has made me feel very reflective, not just because my last time wearing the Politico hat before I joined Brunswick Group, no plugs there, but also just because I've been covering ESMA going back to when it was the Committee of European Securities Regulators, even going back to the Himalaya report, 2004, but stop me there. I don't want to.
Come a long way, baby, for sure. Yeah. All right.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
If I date myself any more than that, if I say Caesar, people won't think of the committee. They'll be thinking Julius and Augustus. So disregard. In any case, Commissioner McGuinness has pointed us clearly forward. So that's the topic for our panel. I will introduce our speakers extremely briefly with apologies, but you know them all very well already. We'll hear from Danuta Hübner, member of the European Parliament and its Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. We'll hear from Robert Orfel, chair of the Autorité des Marchés Financiers, the Financial Market Authority in France. We will also hear from Thomas Book, member of the Executive Board of Deutsche Börse. We have the benefit of hearing from Veerle Colert, chair of ESMA's Securities Market Stakeholder Group, also professor at the University of Leuven. And then we'll hear from John Berrigan, who's the Director General of DG Fisma, basically makes him the top civil servant for financial services at the European Commission, who has more or less already given us the template for this discussion by dropping a little consultation for the public on March 12th about the review of the European Supervisory Authority. So we could do the whole panel on that. But for our focus today on the future of financial markets and regulation, we're going to talk about market oversight. We're going to talk about the Capital Markets Union. I'm sure we will not be able to avoid Brexit. And hopefully we'll have some time to get into Europe's priorities for sustainability and digitalization of the economy. Meanwhile, as Chris has already said, we're counting on your funds. You can use the QR code that he showed you before. It's on the web. Also, it's all over Twitter. Just look hashtag ESMA 10 years. And there you go. While you are your question, conversation, the market super, could ESMA be doing about market supervision?
We lost him. Okay. All right. We had a bit of a technical problem there for John. He'll be back. Why don't we start with John Berrigan, Director General of DG Fisma at the European Commission. John, let me ask you, we're looking at the future now. We heard how far we've come with ESMA and the other supervisory authorities. Where do we go now? Do you have your mic on, John? Make sure you got your mic on, John.
You're absolutely right.
There you go.
Okay, well, first of all,
microphone on. Sorry for the technical problems.
Okay. Is John back? Anyway, John Berrigan. Go ahead, John.
Okay, well, first, thanks a lot. And as I said, I'm delighted to be here, not least because it gives me a chance to publicly acknowledge the contribution of Stephen and Verena to the EU financial services sector over the past 10 years. I've been with them for most of those 10 years. I've been there a lot longer as well. But it's been a privilege to work with them. So I want to say thank you to them. It's always a bit tricky to follow your boss because there's not so much you can say that's different. But I will look a bit forward rather than where we are now. And, just before I look forward, just to lay down a certain basic premise that, if you want a single capital market, you probably need a single rule book, and you probably need consistent supervisory and enforcement regimes. Not necessarily single supervision, but certainly supervisory convergence. And that has to be the ultimate goal of what we're doing in terms of building a capital markets. In the absence of that, of course, you're going to have distorted competition. You're going to have on the unlevel playing field. You're going to have regulatory arbitrage, all the things that you don't want to be a characteristic of a single market. Now, this need for supervisory convergence, I think, is even more important as we look forward in CMU, because CMU is, we hope and we expect going to mean a bigger single capital market for Europe, but also the way we're building it, it's quite clear we're not going to replicate the City of London. Okay, so we're going to have a capital market which will have multiple entry points. And so it's fine to have multiple entry points. I think that's something we can live with, particularly in a world where technology is developing, and we'll come back to some of that later. But it cannot be multiple terms of entry. I've said this many times and I'll say it again. So it's okay to have multiple points, but the way you enter those multiple points have to be on equal terms in terms of supervision. So the question we have to look for going forward is, given that we're going to have this bigger, more integrated capital market across EU, and given it's going to be multipolar, how are we going to reassure all the participants in the EU market that these individual entry points are in fact equivalent in terms of supervisory oversight and enforcement? If they're not, then it's clearly not going to be perceived as a single market and it won't work. Now, I know how sensitive a discussion this is. I have the scars to prove it, but I think the best approach is to focus on the nature of supervision rather on the nature of the supervisor. Okay, and there are various approaches to convergent or more single supervision. Some are more ambitious and therefore politically more sensitive than others, but they range from just closer coordination among the national supervisors to a supervisor of supervisors, and then to the ultimate single supervisor itself. And whatever model we choose going forward, I think we have to be very balanced in our approach to make sure that we only have centralization where centralization makes sense, so that we're sort of proportionate. And I think there are some areas where it today makes sense, and there may be areas in the future where it wouldn't make sense. But I think also there will be areas where maybe it doesn't make sense. So I think, to repeat, I think what Stephen himself has said in the past, we're not looking to see ESMA become an SEC anytime soon. But we do think that where areas of central supervision make sense, we should, put that into practice. And we have seen it in some areas already: third country benchmarks, CRAs, the committee for CCPs, which was mentioned by Commissioner, etc. But there may be other areas where lighter approaches are more appropriate. But what I will say is this, that I think looking forward, some degree of centralization seems inevitable in all areas of the capital market. So it is going to be this question, I think, of balance. Now, we don't have at this stage any preconceived ideas. As you mentioned yourself, John, we have just launched this public consultation, which is in response to a mandate from the co-legislators that we should keep under review exactly what I say, that as the market evolves, we should continuously review whether or not it makes sense to move supervisory powers from the national to the central level or not. We just launched this on the 21st of May. As I said, we enter with no preconceived ideas. We will see what people say back to us. But to go back and finish on my basic point, that if I look forward and I have my ambitions for what a single capital market for Europe is going to be, I think some degree of centralization across all the activities in the market will be needed. But that degree of centralization will and should vary depending on the sort of benefits you get from centralization in the first place. Maybe I'll stop there.
Well, you've certainly put some provocative points out there for the rest of the panel. Excuse me, by the way, for that very brief technical hiccup. Thanks very much to Chris and Sean, both of you, for jumping in. So I guess we'll turn to Danuta Hübner. We've heard Mr. Berrigan speak about the need for some centralization, different levels for different areas, possibly. What do you think? I'm afraid we have, the way we live today, we're going to have to remind you about the mute button, I think.
Yes.
Perfect.
So I made half of my speech already, yes. But I would like to say that I still would like to start on a bit a nostalgic note, because I was in 2008 the commissioner in the Barroso Commission when we made the decision to establish Jacques de Larosière group. And then it was very quickly, 2 years later, basically, we had ESMA and other ESAs already in place. And I remember at that time that the main buzzword, why we need this European financial system to be, from the supervisory point of view, repaired, changed, because of the fragmentation. And we are here 10 years later, 10 years of hard work on European supervision as well, and still the argument of fragmentation remains valid. And I think in the future, there's no doubt about that ESMA and its siblings will have to continue to contribute to the traditional functions like safeguarding stability and enhancing protection of investors and reducing the fragmentation. But I also think that ensuring that market participants comply with existing rules and requirements, guidance, recommendations, all that will stay also in the future. But I also think that we will have to see in European supervision in future more of pragmatism, more of understanding of the importance of the fair competition, more of vigilance about level playing fields, also managing risks, but also creating space for innovation, because markets, I think, will strongly evolve in the years to come and will adapt also constantly. And supervisors or supervision will have to identify new threats before they will be hitting us. And I also think that in the future, supervisors' efficiency will depend strongly on good communication with all stakeholders, and all the institutions must cooperate with policymakers, with legislators, regulators, market participants, use forward-looking approach. I think this aspect of the work of supervision will have to be taken very, very seriously. And unfortunately, I must say that this hugely important challenge that we face in European supervision, which is this choice between national level and European level framework for supervision, this will be, I think, fundamental. And to make right choices will be responsibility of all of us, also those, I think, in this panel. We certainly would like to see all the European CCPs, be it Eurex or Nasdaq, growing and expanding, in particular in OTC clearing segment or also longer dated swaps. But then the question for how long we can keep the supervision at national competence becomes a very legitimate question. So the last sentence I would like to say is that times ahead will be times of huge risks, I think, for financial sector. And this will be, first of all, a challenge for supervision. And there, the role of supervision will be absolutely fundamental. And additionally, I would say that the only way forward will be cooperation of supervisors across not only Europe, I think, also globally, but cooperation based on trust. So building trust will be also, I think, one of the challenges for supervision. But definitely they will be the kings in my view, and we will have to make, the sooner we make the decisions on convergence, on more European centralized solutions, I think the better we will survive the future and the growing competition globally from UK, US, but also Asia. I think we have to think long term and also take into account the other jurisdictions, what will happen there.
Great. Let's put this to Robert Orfel. You've been you've a national regulator, but also have led some of the working groups at ESMA. Where do you see this this balance of the balance that Danuta was talking about as far as how far to centralize?
For me, more direct supervision by ESMA is an evidence, I should say. Until now, the stance has been to embark in an ambitious journey of supervisory convergence and to some extent enforcement convergence between national competent authorities. It is time consuming, to my mind, not very efficient. If we are discussing institutions or infrastructures of significant importance for the EU, if we are discussing services which have a strong cross-border dimension, passported according to the freedom to provide services principle, direct supervision by a European authority is obviously more legitimate and straightforward. One could argue that such a direct supervision is only conceivable if the single rules book is no longer made of directives with very diverse national transpositions or regulation with many national options. But to a large extent, if you intend to passport a service, one could wonder why you should still have national options. Largest EU CCPs, which have been mentioned, are the most obvious candidates for direct supervision. Currently, ESMA is entrusted with the direct supervision of some large third country CCPs, but without being a supervisor of any clearing members, without being the supervisor of any trading venues that clear in these CCPs, and without being the supervisor of similar EU large CCPs. It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. We have a regulation and not a directive. In that case, this is an obvious candidate, but not the only one. The same could apply to key market participants, market infrastructures such as large CSDs or large trading venue with an union-wide reach. And let me take another example, which is LTIF. There could be a case to develop LTIF for retail with a passport. In that case, it would be highly beneficial to have it supervised by ESMA in order to have a single supervisory approach, especially in terms of liquidity management, which could be key in that case. And finally, I would just add a point. If you think that ESMA could step in crisis time without having been a direct supervisor, you're wrong. You're wrong, definitively. So I'm definitively also an advocate for more direct supervision to ESMA.
So even though that's in some ways challenging some of your role at at your agency. I find that quite interesting. Thank you very much. Turning
Preserving
to,
our role could not be the point.
Indeed. That's very European thinking. Next, I'm due to turn to Verla Collert from the stakeholder group. Same question for you. What should be done about market supervision? How do we strike this balance?
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here to represent the stakeholder group, the Securities and Market Stakeholder Group. I personally always found it striking that despite their very similar names, the Banking Union and the Capital Markets Union have shown very different levels of ambition. They both aim at harmonizing the law in order to realize an internal market for financial services. But a major difference is that the Banking Union's single rulebook has a strong institutional underpinning with a single supervisory mechanism, which is in strong contrast with the supervision of the capital markets, which remains still largely at national level, except for some small exceptions. So I would like to come back indeed to this question, whether one direct supervisor would be better. Well, in my view, a system similar to the single supervisory mechanism with a close cooperation between an ESMA with stronger competences and national supervisors would indeed be valuable. There are indeed some convincing arguments to go for such an SSM-like supervision for the capital markets, such as the cross-border impact and even the systemic importance of certain players and events, such as we've seen, for instance, with certain investment funds which got into trouble at the start of the COVID crisis. So on the other hand, it is also more difficult to organize, I think, such an SSM-like system, since there are so many more different players involved in the capital markets. There are the markets, the investment funds, rating agencies, market infrastructures. There's also the prospectus and transparency obligations for listed companies. There's market abuse and so on. So I think this makes the exercise of dividing the powers between ESMA and the national authorities even more challenging than it was in respect of the single supervisory mechanism, where we only had to deal with banks. But I think it is an exercise worth making, always duly taking into account basic principles of EU law, obviously, such as the subsidiarity principle. I would like to take the opportunity to also raise a second point, which has not yet been dealt with, I think, and that is the sectoral division of powers. So until now, we have discussed the vertical line between the ESMA and the national supervisors. But if we look at the horizontal division of powers, we see that we have three sectoral authorities, EBA, ESMA, and TEOPA, whereas today there are more and more cross-sectoral teams, such as sustainable finance and digital finance, where the problems are much more difficult to divide into sectoral competences of those three authorities. And if you divide them, as needs to be done today, there are risks of gaps and inefficient duplication of efforts by those authorities. So that's another point I would like to raise if you think about the future of supervision in Europe.
Yeah, we want to touch on both the sustainability and the digital finance aspect. So you've previewed that for us. We will be back on this for sure. Before we do that, Thomas Book, your turn. Now we've already heard mention of your company, but we'll come back to that. First, for you, I want to stay with our basic question. How do you see what should be done on market supervision, and where's this balance on centralization versus national level oversight?
John, thanks a lot. And let me first start and take a brief moment to also here say my congratulations to Stephen and to Verena. I would rather be with you today in Paris, and I think that would have been a great celebration on the honor of the 10th anniversary that you have well deserved, but we need to do it the way it is these days. And I think the significance of ESMA, one can really see we are living in a very global industry, and I speak here as a market practitioner. When you look from abroad, from the US or from Asia, you couldn't imagine Europe without ESMA as a strong voice, as a supervisor. We heard a bit about clearing, in particular. If you look at clearing, the Commissioner mentioned the CCP Supervisory Committee. Really, we can see the potential for ESMA being a thought leader, and EMEA also being a blueprint of regulation. So I'd like to thank Stephen and Verena, but also I had the pleasure to be 5 years on the SMSG, and that also taught me a lot. I learned a lot in the many trips to Paris, and I would also like to express the appreciation to the ESMA staff and their technical competence. And I really learned a lot about how broad your remit is, but also how narrow the boundaries of your mandate sometimes can be. Let me just give you a brief few observations, probably from another perspective. And we now spoke a lot about the role of supervision, but the role of capital markets in the current state that we are in. I think for me personally, we really live in the most transformational times that I have seen. The crisis that we are in really crystallizes many of the changes that we are seeing towards a digitized world, towards a sustainable world, and also a platform-based economy. And it also really highlights the urgency to come to a strategic view on the role of capital markets. And if we look at Europe's capital markets in the global context, I think on the one hand, we see we have done really well to cope with the crisis last year, and a lot of the reforms have paid off that were undertaken, and also the supervisory system improvements really have paid off. But on the other hand, we have to acknowledge that the European capital markets are massively underdeveloped. This is true in various dimensions. It's true if we look at the number of IPOs, which is far lower, so around 15% of global IPOs are just in Europe. It is true if we look at the market cap. Europe is, well, the US is 40% larger in GDP, but 4 times larger in market cap of the listed companies. And it is also true if we look at the fragmentation of our markets, the number of venues that we have, 250 compared to 100 in the US. So we have a very fragmented and less transparent capital market that is undeveloped. And I think it is very important that we take a strategic view on the importance of these capital markets in a time of transformational change. It is very important to finance the economic recovery. It is important to fund the move towards a green and digitized economy. We need the financing capacity. Banks will not be able to deliver. Banking funding will not be able to deliver the funds needed. And therefore, I think it is very much welcome that also the Commission now, we saw the communication in January, take a view on the strategic role and also on the importance in the, as a competitive factor for the economy in a geopolitical context, to look at how can we strengthen capital markets and make them more competitive. And I think there are very important dossiers ahead. MiFID review is ahead, when we need to recalibrate the compass where we are heading. But also, of course, we spoke about the role of Brexit, the importance of having our own market infrastructures here in Europe developed. And I think that is a very important angle. That is the underlying remit to the supervisory discussion that we've just heard.
Yes. Okay, so now we have a picture as starting to emerge. Lots of concern about fragmentation, the need to address it. We'll have to probe, I think, a little bit more to get a sense of how far ESMA can go in addressing some of this. Just a reminder to the audience: do send in your questions. Chris Burns is standing by. He's going to be coming in quite soon with questions on that. So, meanwhile, from the first round of comments, anyone on the panel want to react to what you've heard so far? Just wave your hand, and we'll call on you. Otherwise, I'll put someone on the spot, and we can, of course, move on to other topics. I see, Robert, are you calling for the floor?
If I could rebound on Thomas' point, I think for me there is a need in a change of perspective to some extent. the issue of the competitiveness of our financial sector is not sufficiently taken into account. It is, however, a key point. If we intend to have an efficient market intermediation with appropriate saving instruments and an efficient financing of our economies, including the financing of our companies abroad, it's also a key point, this competitiveness, if we intend to ascertain the EU financial independence and sovereignty. The idea of that third country firms, if located in the EU, could deliver the bulk of financial services needed in the EU is totally wrong. And we could be successful in relocating in the EU some trades and services, but it should not be at the expense of the development of our own financial industry outside the EU. Should it be the role of the EU Commission, the co-legislators, or for the ESAs? I don't know. But it's fair to say that currently, at ESMA in particular, this dimension is not taken sufficiently into account. The basic idea is that as financial supervisor and even as financial regulator, we are just entitled to implement the level 1 and level 2 regulation. And even if we could have some leeway, it's very restrictively used. I do believe that this stance should be adjusted in order to increase the competitiveness on our own financial institutions and infrastructures. But obviously, it should be done with the co-legislator's support, not on our own. But I think for the future, that's a very key point to have in mind.
This brings us into the area of capital markets union, and I think, as predicted, we can't really avoid Brexit. Maybe I'll try to take Robert's point, put it into a provocatively phrased question, if I'll try. Do you think that ESMA needs to have a competitiveness mandate, something maybe similar to what the UK is considering for its own regulators? Let's put everybody on the spot. Danuta Hübner, and then John Berrigan, and then Mairead McGuinness.
Okay, thank you. I was alluding to, probably in a shy way, but when I was trying to say that there are those traditional functions and responsibilities of supervision, but I think in the years to come, we should also see that a supervisor is also more open to pragmatic solution that is also taking into account the importance of fair competition, that also looks at level playing field, that also is creating, considering or taking into account the fact that through its supervision, also the space for innovation, for competitiveness, for further transformation that would make our financial services sector more competitive. This is all, I think, which we should somehow add to the responsibilities of the supervision. That supervision toolkit, which has grown enormously, I think shouldn't be just closed or limited to all those ensuring that all market participants just respect and using complicated and more instruments to make them respect the toolkit or the rule book. That's, I think, not enough for the future, because I think the fight will be in a different level of a different category level, I think. So we just have to move forward also on the supervision from that point of view.
Good. There you go. Elaborated on the pragmatism. Sean Berrigan, put you on the spot with this. Do you think competitiveness mandate for the supervisors? Sorry, it's the classic mute
I've
button.
done it again. I'm being polite and then forgetting to turn it off. Look, I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we organize this in mandates. I mean, I do agree that supervisors need to have a wider view of the world in which they live, and to make sure that in addition to what they do with their primary objective, which after all is to do with stability, is to do with prudential prudential oversight, that they take this wider view into account. One of my previous bosses used to frequently refer to the need for stability, but not the stability of the graveyard. So you can't just focus uniquely on stability. You have to see stability in this broader context. At the same time, I think you can never, you have to be careful that you don't create within the mandate of the supervisor conflicts, where he's put in the position where he has to compromise what perhaps is his primary objective, which is financial stability, which is proper prudential oversight with these competitiveness of objectives. Interesting enough, in Europe, in particular context of the ESAs, my institution is around, and my institution takes advice, of course, from ESMA and others, but we don't necessarily have to follow it to 100% because the Commission has that wider view. And we don't always follow the advice of the ESAs 100%. We fully respect, of course, their advice. It's based on their view of what is prudentially correct. But because we have this broader mandate, you know that in the past we have deviated from that advice, and we've deviated from the advice exactly along the lines that you said, where we take this broader view of the economy, broader view of what stability means, because you will not be stable if you're not growing. Okay, let's be clear. This is not a recipe for stability. So there, I just repeat what my bosses used to say: stability, yes, but not stability of the graveyard. But whether we need to formally include that into the mandate of the ESAs, I think I would be a little bit careful.
A fair point. It's ESMA is only part of the picture here. Verla Colert, last word on this one before we get into other topics.
Yes, I would agree with John that we should be careful in what should be put in the mandate of ESMA. On the other hand, I think competitiveness is a key reason why there would be a need for a larger role for ESMA. If you look at it from third country players, it is very important that in Europe there's not just the same rules in all member states, but also that the rules are applied in the same way in all member states. And therefore, I think if you look at it from that way, competitiveness between the European market and other markets, there's another argument for a larger role for ESMA in supervision.
Okay, well, put that on a postcard, send it in for the Commission's consultation. Just a reminder, we're coming to the audience Q&A hopefully very, very soon. Before that, I just want to make sure that we give Thomas Book a chance to respond to some of the comments we heard earlier, about specifically supervision of your company's CCP, your ex. So here's your chance to, how do you respond to what you've been hearing so far? I think we're going to need the mute button again.
Yeah, here we go. And let me probably add here to the comments that I also believe it is a great opportunity to activate the power of capital market for Europe and for the challenges that we have ahead of us by sort of equitizing our financing. And I think, speaking about supervision, we do need strong supervision. And I mean, to be clear, I think ESMA is a lighthouse in that supervision. We need convergence. If we speak about capital markets union, that is really activating the power of the single European market, activating our capital markets, which I think is urgently required. And we need to do that with the right compass on what is the market structure that we need. So creating a competitive and transparent market structure, both for those companies that seek funding, but also for the investors. We earlier spoke about the retail investors in the interest of all of those. So I think if we look into a global context, we have learned over the past years some lessons in the ages of Donald Trump, the upcoming sort of tension between China and a strong US fighting for global dominance. Also with the Brexit taking away the largest capital market of the financial market out of the EU, how important it is that we develop our own capital market to support the real economy now in the economic recovery that is required after Corona, but also to support the Green Deal, for instance, which requires a lot of funding, and also the digitalization. So all these challenges, I think, is key, and that all, of course, with a strong supervision that also puts a priority on convergence.
Indeed, that's the whole ecosystem. But so just our last crack at this, just before we move on, just because your own company, we have to ask direct supervision at European level. We've heard different points of view. Any reaction?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, for us being supervised, I think it is still rather for the public sector to discuss the structure of supervision. But it is, of course, clear that it is important to have common rules and strong convergence in Europe. I think it is a very important role for Asthma that there is. I think the remit is very broad. I would agree with some of the comments made earlier. We need to further evolve the supervisory system in Europe to be strong. But I think in the end, we need to, of course, develop here the capital markets, and we need to implement. I mean, we have done a lot of analysis. So, for instance, the action plan that was rolled out for the capital markets union that was announced last year, we just have to execute now and implement those measures that have been discussed. I think there are other measures around strengthening the role of the euro, also some of the communication that will now put out on the autonomy of the EU financial markets. All these, I think, have to be a priority now going forward.
Okay, so we'll stay with our themes of convergence for the moment rather than direct supervision, it sounds like.
John, can I just say one more thing? Just one
more
sentence.
thing, and then we'll before we move on, sure.
And then, okay, I just wanted to say that I believe that we are really entering a completely different time, and there will be a lot of new issues in the regulatory space, and we need to adjust, I think, supervision to also those issues, and a lot of them will be directly also linked to, for example, competitiveness as well, if you think of climate or ESG in general. And just so I guess that looking just through the past also for the future mandate of the supervision, I'm not talking only about ESMA, but in general supervision, I think we need some reflection. I'm not saying we should jump to the new mandate with all the issues to the new mandate, but just reflecting on this, that we are going to need a supervision in a completely different environment also for financial sector. Thank you.
Great point taken. And also you bring us to sustainability, which we're hoping to get to. So while we're reflecting on this, maybe we can start with what exactly ESMA can do for the priority of sustainability. We heard from the earlier discussions, the first panel, also the earlier speakers. We heard about the importance of information from companies, making sure that that's consistent, that the information is usable for investors. So there's that aspect. Also, ESMA does have, direct, charges, direct companies that it directly supervises. So it could be using its influence on those companies to try to improve information about sustainability. So maybe, I guess the question for everyone on the panel is, what should ESMA be doing next? Its top priority for sustainability. Who would like to go first on this? I think it might be your turn, Verla.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think ESMA is already doing a lot. It has developed a lot of the level 2 rules already. What I would see as very important for the near future and very urgent indeed is more convergence in respect of ESG ratings and labels. ESMA has indeed sent a letter already to the Commission asking for regulation of ESG ratings. And I think as ESMA is already competent for credit ratings, they should also be the competent authority to supervise ESG ratings once they are regulated at the EU level. Second, and that's also, I think, first, task for the Commission is labels. We have a lot of national labels which are not regulated at the moment. I think there's a need for regulation of at least the governance of those labels, so that there's a number of minimum quality standards for those labels which are set in EU regulation. And then again, since those labels are also used in the entire European Union and are very important that they are fair in order to avoid greenwashing, I think it is also for ESMA which should be the supervisor of the regulation, which should regulate those labels, in my view.
It's all about greenwashing. I'm looking for hands up among the panelists who would like to tackle this one next. It could be about the question of ESG ratings or the labels, or else just more generally what ESMA should be focusing on for sustainability. Who would like the floor before I just point to one of you? There you go, Sean Berrigan.
No, I mean, I think I just want to echo what has been said already. I mean, ESMA is already deeply involved in sustainability effort. We have and will have a raft of legislation coming down the line. For the co-legislators will have to work on this. Typically in these pieces of legislation, there are lots of level 2 activities that have to be done. And so I think, I see roles for ESMA in all that we're doing going forward. So there'll be roles for ESMA in how we organize a taxonomy. There'll be a role for ESMA in how we organize disclosure for corporates. Green bond standards, there will be a role there too. Also on labels, as has been said. Rating agencies are becoming more active in this space. ESMA already has certain roles there. We may need to expand that. But I think, it doesn't seem to me, in any way possible for us in the EU or in the Commission to propose lots of legislation or for the co-legislators to adopt the sort of legislation they're going to be adopting without having a key role for ESMA in that. And they have it already. I think they'll have a bigger one going forward.
Excellent. Did I see Danuta Hübner? Did I see your hand going up? We just need your mute button.
Just muting me all the time. I'm not muting myself, but I'm muted. So I just wanted to, I support what John has just said, that there is practically across all the new challenges related to sustainable finance and sustainability, a role for ESMA. And I think we are facing already, we'll face hopefully if we have the Recovery and Resilience Fund and we will have the green bonds issued to a huge extent, 37% of the recovery or New Generation EU funding. So I think that somebody will have to really provide investors with a sort of strong degree of legal certainty that their investment will remain green. And I don't know whether this can be done in a simple way, as sometimes people think, or whether this will be a bigger, I think, a deeper responsibility of supervision also. That we can see that the label is stayed with the funding till the end of the project, of the process of funding. And I think here I would see clearly the role of ESMA, because if we aim as the Union actually, I think, is hoping to aiming at becoming a world leader in not only in issuing the bonds, but also in the standard setting for the green bond issuance, that I think we have to ensure that this standard is also protected and respected within the European Union. And this without ESMA probably would be difficult to do. So there is a role for the Commission, for the member states, I think, as well, and for ESMA, definitely. Thank you.
Maybe I could hone in a bit more if Thomas Book or Roberto Fell wants to come in on this. I can give you the more focused question on this. Both of you, with Deutsche Börse, you have a large pool of listed companies who will be disclosing information about sustainability, and in France, the AMF will be enforcing how companies make their disclosures. So maybe for you two, do you think that ESMA could play some role in policing how policing the quality of the information that we get from companies? I'm not sure who would like to be on the spot first. Looks like Thomas Book reaching for the unmute button.
I can be quick and brief, and probably also from the industry perspective. I think Europe really has the opportunity to be the first mover in the ESG space and in green finance, right? So, the US so far has lagged behind, and that will probably change now under the new administration. But when I look, we've rolled out a lot of products in the ESG space, indices, also derivatives. Europe is leading, and we see a lot of uptake from the investors on ETFs, on ESG futures. I think, first of all, the role is now for the legislator to provide a clear framework for the taxonomy, and then I'm sure, ESMA's role will be growing, and ESMA will, of course, play a very important role also in this segment. First of all, I think it's very important that we have a clear
an audio problem here. I'm sorry to jump in here. Sorry, Thomas. Entschuldigung. But I think, Robert, you had a couple more things to say. We got to go to quick question and answer, so if you could answer briefly, please.
I will be brief. ESMA is already enforcing some sort of consistency in financial disclosure according to the IFRS. There will be a role for non-financial disclosure the same way. One of the difficulties of the sustainable finance issue has already been flagged is that it's common to many authorities. It's EBA, IOPA are also part of this story, and it's done through what we call the joint committee. That's part of the difficulty to ensure coordination, transparency, and but it's fairly needed to have this global transversal view on sustainability finance issues. And I stop here.
Okay. I don't think the discussion stops here, because I think it's going to be a long time.
Absolutely. It does continue.
Chris, you had some Q&A, I think.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions, and for those watching, please do send in more on that QR code that you see on your screen, and keep in mind the hashtag ESMA 10 years for any tweeting you would like to do, and to send in any comments, send out any comments you'd like. Yeah, I got some questions here. I'll pitch them out, and then John, you can decide whom to call on. A large focus of the post-crisis reform was to reduce global fragmentation of markets. We've been talking about fragmentation now throughout the panel. For a long time, much improvement was made to achieve this. However, some significant shifts in global politics in recent years has seen an increase in more nationalistic and domestic-driven agendas. What impact is this having on the objective to have truly global and open financial markets? Who should answer that?
Wow, you can't get any wider-ranging question than that. That's great.
It is, indeed.
I'm looking for a hand to go up to first volunteer. I think I see Danuta Hubner.
Yes, I'm sorry. Probably it's not for me to respond to this question, but I remember complaining.
It is.
Sorry, again I'm muted. No,
you're okay.
That's fine. Okay, but I remember a lot of conversation within the parliament with the business, with all the stakeholders of the financial sector, how happy and how proud we were that we managed after the previous crisis to start investing into the global dimension of the financial sector, whatever we touched. And then when I worked on EMIR, just the realization that basically everything is global, and that's why we are just a segment linked to the rest of the world, and we just have to do everything that we can through our legislative power and our being a trendsetter also in legislation, that we can also influence the world. And also the way John is always saying that the best way for the Commission to influence the global standards is just through the participation in the meeting of this Bio Basel Committee, and that's we all know. So I think we invested as a union a lot in bringing the global world to understand that we are all in the same boat, and the business financial sector is definitely the global business. But somebody who was asking the question, clearly there is this economic nationalism that clearly exists, and certainly Brexit is also triggering this type of thinking, the sovereignty and this language of national identity. This is also, we had the 4 years in the US. So there was a lot of politically triggered, I think, nationalism was triggered, I think, politically as well. And we just have to oppose it. And I hope that with this strategic autonomy, that we replace it with resilience one day. We have to be, of course, more assertive. We have to protect our interests, but not at the expense of again, getting the world industries really fragmented, and this is lose-lose, I think, for all of us. And I think union is the best placed for this to do now in cooperation with Americans. And also I hope that with the UK we will also achieve this cooperative approach, a long-term cooperative approach, and that we will remain open and sufficiently assertive to protect the interest. That's absolutely obvious, but not at the expense of sort of providing incentives to further fragmentarization of the in the global, especially financial sector. I think is not going to win from the fragmentation, and everything that is based on standards and on regulatory cooperation. That's why I was saying all the time that I think the future belongs in a way to supervision and cooperation between the supervisors, because this old approach, I think, that we had in the last years is not going to work well, where we are protecting, giving equivalence and still protecting ourselves. I think we need more cooperation, I guess, to benefit and to be more competitive, but also to benefit. Thank you.
So how do we get more cooperation? I see a few heads nodding. Sean Berrigan, need to hear from you on this. Thomas Book, I think, as well after that.
Okay, I mean, I must say my memory of the financial crisis of the period around that is a bit different to the one the questioner has put forward. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to be around before the crisis. And there was, before the crisis, there was also a great commitment to global integration. Indeed, there was a great progress in global integration. And we did this on the basis of efficiency. I was one of the main cheerleaders myself of global integration. But our definition of efficiency tended to be a bit short. It was focused on cost and choice, and didn't really include stability as part of that definition of efficiency. Now, if you widen the definition of efficiency to take into stability, then the global financial crisis was a great lesson in how we didn't do that. In fact, our markets were deeply integrated, but under stress, they actually fragmented again. I mean, you look at banking in Europe, it was far more integrated before the crisis than it is now, but it was integrated on the basis of bailout by the government, which was not a very solid basis for integration. So what we have done since the crisis is try to rebuild the integrated global market, again, based on efficiency consideration, but with this wider definition of efficiency. So it's about cost, it's about choice, but it also has to take account of stability. And that is where you have to think about these arrangements in terms of stress. And that's where I think the geopolitical change has come about, because people are beginning to think that in conditions of stress, fully globally integrated markets can leave different parts of the world vulnerable, particularly in the markets we're talking about here, where integrated markets, which basically run on liquidity, tend to concentrate in certain places based on liquidity. And then you have to think, how do those markets, which are then concentrated in one place, perform under stress for the system as a whole? And that's where we turn right round to where Danuta said about cooperation. If you can get supervisory cooperation to a level that it can withstand the stress that comes with crisis, then I think we're onto something. But clearly the evidence of 2010 was that the cooperation arrangements we had in place didn't withstand stress so well. So I think it's not just, and the debate about global integration tends to always focus on the good times. And on the good times, you can see all the economic benefits, and they're absolutely, and I'm a big fan of global integration. But since the crisis, I have learned that you have to think about this in terms of stress as well. And any cooperation arrangements you have in place need to be sufficiently robust to withstand stress. And as I've said on many occasions before, fully globally integrated markets probably won't be possible while we have different jurisdictions for law, different jurisdictions for tax, different jurisdictions for democracies. So there will be sort of natural limits on the extent to which we can extract all the efficiency gains from integration. But I remain as committed to it as ever.
Fair, all fair and slightly sobering points, actually. Other panelists want to come in on this? Thomas Book, I see nodding your head, and then Virla after that.
Yeah, probably just briefly, I fully agree with them because comments. I think the topic here, it was earlier said, it's about building trust, which is very important. We are in very global markets, right? It's key that there's trust among regulators, among politicians. Yet the other side of the coin is I think we shouldn't be naive. If there is room for regulatory arbitrage, we need to also look and sort of have command of our own fate. And I think it's about very much regulatory arbitrage. If we talk about the Brexit angle, I think that is in the end the question, is arbitrage around among these two systems. Will we have equivalence? And that is also the case. Do we have a stable global standard that is the foundation when we talk about global difference? I think that is really the question in the end. I think for the EU still, it is very important that we look at it from a strategic angle. We need market infrastructures here in Europe. We shouldn't be fully dependent on foreign market infrastructures that support the role of the euro internationally, and that also create resilience and stability. So I think it is very much about the question: are we able to create global standards that are sufficiently strong?
Yes, thanks. Professor Gollert, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I think in this discussion about nationalism and Europeanism, we should indeed make a distinction between times of crisis and times of stability. I think in times of stability, everyone is willing to cooperate within the European Union, and there's time to do so. There's time for supervisory convergence, and ESMA has been doing a great job in achieving this. But in times of crisis, when measures need to be taken urgently, every member state will take the measures it thinks are necessary. And so there will not be time for coordination, and there will not be Europeanism. So it is indeed in times of crisis that you need more powers for ESMA to take action and to coordinate, or maybe go beyond coordination and take decisions itself.
John, I've got like at least several questions, and we've got about 8 minutes left. So if people could talk in a sound bite, that would be really great that we could get to all these questions. Let me try this one on you. COVID and sustainable finance. We have watched governments adopting measures to contain the fallout of COVID-19. Some of these measures, to a certain extent, go against their climate agenda. However, we also know that many governments still have climate change and sustainable finance as a key point on their agendas. How do you see this interplay between short-term and long-term risks? Has COVID taught us how to balance longer-term sustainability goals and immediate threats to the real economy? That could be a whole conference, but who would like to grab that and tell me in 3 sentences what you think?
Let's have it. Let's have the 30-second version.
Go for it.
I think it's again the question about short-term and long-term, and it can be necessary in the short term to do something which is needed immediately for stability reasons, and then even if that goes against your sustainability goals. But in the long term, you can pick up those long-term sustainability goals again. It shows that there's a conflict between goals sometimes, and then you should choose what is the most important goal at that moment.
Okay.
But in the long term, you can pursue both.
Okay. Let me go to the next. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Danuta.
No, we had.
But maybe it's not interesting, but I just would like to say that especially the sustainable investment has to be seen from the long-term perspective. Any short-termism, I think, should not apply here, because also we need a lot of decisions to be based on science and also availability of data. And that all this link with science, I think, is absolutely important. And we are at the beginning of the long journey with regard to sustainability. It will not come overnight. That's why I think consensus about principles is fundamental. But there will be moments of departure. But I think the most important thing is to have really agreement on principles and long-term perspective and just gradually do it.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't talk long-term, but medium term? We don't have much time.
Well, so, you know.
Yes, indeed.
By 2030, we got to be on the right track.
I'm not talking like Kuznets 60 years or something like that. No,
right, exactly.
Yes, more than 3.
Okay, next question. The GameStop frenzy showed how gamification and zero commission trading can give rise to risky behaviors on the side of retail investors. Although financial education plays a fundamental role in the long term, the economic crisis related to COVID can fundamentally alter the risk perception of retail investors and encourage hazardous strategies, making GameStop-like scenarios more likely in the short term. Is ESMA suited and ready to face this challenge? Well, who would like
let's
to?
Do this. Yes or no? Yes or no questions.
Yeah, it's yes or no.
What do you
Only
think?
John knows the answer. Yeah.
They are, I would say, they are no less ready than anybody else in the world. I think this is something we have all discovered. We discovered it in the US more than we have. And we are all sitting, looking, trying to learn the lessons from it. So I would say they're probably not ready, but no less ready than other authorities.
Robert, you wanted to add something?
Not a consolation, I would say.
Now, the GameStop story, first of all, is a short squeeze. It's a short squeeze.
Yeah.
But the consequence of this short squeeze has been amplified in the US by many factors, and they are there. We have to think about it. We have to think about it. But
we can't just say it's some crazy American thing.
No,
right?
for the time being, but it will come. It will come to us. It will come to us as usual. But we have time to think about it. What about a short squeeze? What about payment for order flow? What about using social media to exchange views on these 3 topics should be addressed, all of them.
Okay, next
Great.
question.
For the 15th anniversary. Actually, Thomas Book, let's bring you in really quickly before we get to our last question, if you could.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly, I mean, ESMA made already communication on the topic. I think absolutely it is in the mandate of ESMA to look at the practices, to also force supervisory conversion. I think the topic of payment for order flow is a concerning one. We need to have an interest to have sustainable retail investment in equity markets and to also support that. But there are very different practices in the member states, right? And I think it is absolutely crucial that there are no costs and no conflict of interest in brokers.
So it is definitely within ESMA's purview to do that. Next question, in light of digital finance, such as the recent GameStop incident in the US, how do you view the new breed of service providers seeking to democratize finance, like social trading, copy trading? So that's a related question. Who can answer that in a soundbite?
Okay, Vera Collier, first finger up.
Yes, I think that there the biggest problem or question is level playing field. And you see that there are always new ways of offering products and new products to investors which are not regulated. And then the question is, do they need to be regulated? Do they need to be regulated in the same way or in a looser way? And the question is always, what is the same service and the same product and what is different? And so it's a very difficult question and an ongoing exercise, I think, for both the European Commission, European institutions, and also ESMA to decide whether a certain instrument falls within a definition or not. We've had that discussion in the SMSG, for instance, the question whether a crypto asset is a security. Very difficult question, where there would be a need to have a European definition of what is a security, which is lacking at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't want to have 27 different interpretations of what this should be, right? It's better to have one.
Indeed.
Final. Sorry, John. Go
Berrigan,
ahead.
you spoke, well, just because John Berrigan, you were speaking about different multiple points of entry for market players, but single terms of entry. So on something on like new players coming in, online brokerage, this kind of thing, who should be the gatekeeper?
Oh,
sorry, we just need you unmuted again. I think it might be on our end.
Yeah, but I'm back. No, I think as Danuta has said before, I mean, the financial system is changing and it will have implications for how we regulate and how we supervise. And this goes back to my earlier point that looking forward, there may be areas where it becomes very sensible, simply by logic, that you do supervise centrally. And this may be one of them. The issue here around retail investor, and as you know, in the CMU project, we want to promote retail investment. But I must say our sort of view of this up to now has been retail investors tapping markets via intermediaries. We didn't expect such a large, and we still probably don't expect a very large direct participation by retail. On the other hand, we don't want to restrict choice. If people want to access markets, they should be able to. The question here is a little bit this level playing field that has been mentioned. The retail investor has to play in a world where there are many investors with considerable information asymmetries. And it may well be, they look in this GameStop that everybody was sort of all working together, all a sort of kind of democratic response, a democratic action against the hedge funds, etc. But I must say, when you look at this more clearly, you can see that there were many people playing in this GameStop discussion, and they weren't all individual retail investors just out there accessing through their PC in an atomistic way. So as I said, we have to be very careful. No one wants to restrict choice, and certainly not me, but I think we have to be careful that when people enter these markets, they are playing with sophisticated players as well, who can let's say mislead them in these markets. So choice, yes, but with the adequate degree of protection, I think.
Good. I think that may have to be our last word, unless Chris, unless you had a yes or no.
I'm told we can go a little bit over time on this. Robert, did you have something else to ajouter on this?
Not really. The main point is we need retail investors. We need them. We will have to replenish the capital of many corporations. We need investors able to sustain new projects, risky projects, and retail should be part of the story, part of the solution. And it's very sensitive for us not to be up to the task, to demonstrate that investing in the financial market for retails is fair, is treated fairly, and it's part of the duty of financial regulator and supervisor to bring this confidence in the market, and because if we lose retails now, we will not have them be for a long time.
Right. Very important to instill that sense of confidence. I think we have to wrap it up. John, thank you so much to John and to all the speakers. And we're going to have to move on. We're going to look at, this is very enlightening about where we have to go now. And we're going to look at the illustrator's interpretation. Caroline Chappell, are you with us here?
I am, Chris. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Show us what you have at this point.
I will do. Oh, sorry. Got to have a little bit of technical.
Okay.
Not that much.
All right. Here we go. All right.
Very clear.
Very good. Can you talk us through a little bit of it?
Yes, certainly. So obviously we've had this great conversation about the supervision in the top left. We're talking about the national versus European.
Right.
the whole idea of whether direct supervision for ESMA and also bring up that sectoral division of responsibilities, to remember that as well. And a lot of talk about how we need to build on trust, collaborate, look to the future.
Like we just talked about. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
and trying to get away from that fragmentation that won't help any of us. And the test of any integrated market being how well it survives stress. But also appreciating that supervisors need to have that wider view.
Very good.
We also talked about sustainability and a little bit about digital. And really ending with that sense that we need retail investors to help us rebuild. And that brings back all that we're saying about making protection with flexibility and supervision where it makes sense, centralized supervision where it makes sense.
Trying to ensure a level playing field with the eyes on the prize toward a capital markets union. That's really great. Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panel very much for being with us. We'll see you the next time, next anniversary. Hope to see you then. And let's move on to a couple of more conversations we'll have. We move to David Wright, who is the Chair of Eurofi. That is the financial services think tank, Eurofi.net. And David, you were the rapporteur of the Larosière report, which led to ESMA, among other things. So let's have some comments from you, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A. How's that?
That sounds very good, Chris, and thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me okay?
You look great, yeah. Super, go ahead.
Well, distinguished guest, I'm greatly honored to have been asked to contribute to this important milestone and at a very important time. And having been, Chris, the rapporteur, not just on the de Larosière committee, but also the Lamfalussy committee, which preceded it, it's a source, I have to say, personally, of some satisfaction to see where ESMA has arrived at after 10 years, and indeed the European Banking Authority and the EIOPA as well. I don't think those of us who were involved at the time doing this work could possibly have expected such change, such rapid institutional, although Neem Maloney said to us earlier, constrained institutional cementing, such growth, such really impressive personnel in ESMA, and the Europeanization of many decisions and so forth. And this all in a short matter of 10 years. And wherever I've been, over the last 10 years and talked about ESMA, I've heard really nothing except praise about the professionalism and competence of the organization. I think that's very powerful. Now, I want to talk a bit about the institutional issues and about Capital Markets Union very briefly. I mean, on the institutional stuff, the distribution of competences and powers, that is right at the heart of ESMA's development and will continue to be so in the future. Right from the four-level Lamfalussy structure, which was non-binding, but shaping in policy terms, the Commission had to take a lot of attention to what CESA was telling them. Primus inter pares, if you like, was CESA. To the external establishment of the ESAs 10 years ago, in the teeth of the worst financial crisis at the time that we'd faced for nearly a century. But let us be honest here, and it was quite a battle, quite a struggle, quite a tussle to get where we are today. I mean, some member states, I shan't mention them, but two in particular, one which is left, wanted to minimize ESMA's role and minimize its powers. We had other member states. I remember talking in 2000 to the director of the Treasury in France, who said very clearly, La France ne veut pas de la procédure. He made it very clear that France wanted substance. substance for the new architecture in Europe. The European Parliament has been always politically supportive of the development of the ESAs and of course wanting at the same time to preserve its institutional role of oversight and democratic accountability. The Commission, who of course made the proposals to develop these institutions, has always been highly attentive, understandably so, to preserve its right of initiative under all circumstances. And I can remember some very heated discussions with the legal services as we tried to develop the Lamfalussy structure and so forth. But of course, you know, at the heart of all of this is this famous Moroni judgment, which, as far as I'm aware, still is on the statute book. I hope it's going to be erased as soon as possible because it limits the delegation of powers, the sensible delegation of powers to the European authorities. Now, the reality is that we need, if we're going to build a capital markets union, Robert and many others, Sean, have said this, more centralization of powers where it makes sense. Where will it make sense? Where its business is cross-border, where it's potentially systemic, where there are risks of arbitrage, and so forth. There's a very good definition of this from the Dutch supervisory authority. But at the same time, we have to be realistic that all of these powers cannot be given, a full set of powers cannot be given to ESMA. I remember a BaFin regulator telling me that her job was to supervise 37,000 broker-dealers in Germany, and that simply cannot be done at the level of ESMA today. So the challenge is to get the hub and spoke system organized. It will evolve over time. All federal structures do. The United States still today argues about the distribution of powers between the states and federal levels, often ending up in the Supreme Court to arbitrate. So this is nothing new. The thing is to agree the right set of powers as markets and integration proceeds.
David, can I jump in here because we have barely 5 minutes left, and I'd love to ask you about a couple of things, if possible.
Sure.
Did you want to finish the thought, or can I ask you right now? Because, for instance, you when we talked a few days ago, you talked about the green rod of discipline, that powerful force for millennial investors that there can be on the markets, and how can ESMA help with that?
Well, I was just coming to the point that ESMA's powers need to be developed further, and one of them has to be, for example, a strong, in my view, power to enforce supervisory convergence. It's no good just having, you know, a weak peer review system. It's got to have some teeth to it.
Yeah.
Likewise, there have to be sanctions on products, stronger sanctions on products that are not good for the market, and so forth. So I would give ESMA needs far more disciplinary powers, both over its membership and over the markets.
Okay, and what? Let me ask you too about the urgency for capital markets, and we were talking about this with Robert just now, to generate capital for European businesses that otherwise would go elsewhere. And you mentioned to me the Irish business Stripe, right? The payment processing platform founded by two Irish brothers. Where? In California, because that's where they found they found the financing there.
Well, this is exactly why we need the Capital Markets Union. You're exactly right to point to that. That company should have been developed financially in Europe, and there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of other examples.
I've talked to numerous startups. The same story I hear from numerous startups.
Same story all over again. Well, if you can't find the capital, you'll go where you can find the capital. We had another warning last week too, Chris. Jay Powell, the governor of the Federal Reserve, saying that US growth will be 6.5% this year. Our growth will be 3.7%. And unless and until we really drive forward Capital Markets Union, it's very simple. We will simply not be able to deliver the laudable political projects of the European Union. And I'm talking about sustainability, digital, spreading wealth among countries, and so forth. It won't happen. The infrastructure demands. We need Capital Markets Union developed urgently and we needed a timetable to deliver it.
Yeah, I got just a couple minutes left. What about the Brexit effect? I mean, we've been talking about different angles about this, but there's one thing too is, if we want this capital markets union, I believe the UK stood in the way of some of this this effort to bring together this central authority. Do you think that Brexit frees the EU 27 to push faster toward capital markets union without the UK in it?
I think to some extent institutionally that is probably right. I think that certainly the UK was often a reluctant partner on many aspects, in spite of the fact that, of course, the UK had a huge and still has a huge balance of trade surplus on financial services with the European Union. What the point I'd like to make here, Chris, is, you know, on both sides, the European Union and the UK, I think the first point of principle is good for growth and what is good for our people. And surely cooperating together, as the Commissioner said, and trusting each other and building markets and allowing markets to develop together would be my hope.
Can I ask you one last thing? I interviewed Jean-Claude Trichet for Bloomberg Television back in, I think it was 2008, 9. I mean, it was right in the middle of the financial crisis. And in that interview, and repeatedly when he made his spiel as ECB chief, he was talking about complacency. We must not be complacent. How big a danger is that now that we're way past that financial crisis? We're in difficult straits now, but it is not what it was back in 2008. If we want to push forward towards capital markets union, how much of a danger is complacency?
Well, I think it is a big danger, and I don't think people are complacent. I mean, you can't be complacent after your economies crashed by 8% or so last year. However, I think that as things improve, this complacency factor could come in again. And that is why I've been arguing for many years now that we need to fix a political deadline to deliver. And actually, nothing we can do in Europe would create confidence than doing that. Actually delivering what we've said we're going to do on time to a mandate with cooperation between the three institutions. That is the way to move forward. And I don't think the techniques change, frankly, from the days of Jacques Delors.
David Wright, Chair of Eurofi, thank you so much. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All the best. Let me now turn to Stephen. Let me turn to Stephen. Stephen Mayor, Chair of ESMA. Stephen, it's great to see you.
Good to see you,
yes.
Chris. Very good to see you.
And I know that in a certain amount of time, you're going to move on.
Yes, absolutely, by the end of this month.
So this is very important to hear from you how far we've come and where you think we should go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you very much for David being present also here. And of course, all the other speakers and making this event in such an interesting event. And I also especially liked the last comment or question around complacency. I think if there's one person that avoids complacency, it is David Wright. Ladies and gentlemen, in taking up my duties as the first chair of the newly established European and Securities Markets Authority in 2011, I declared that the creation of this new body marks a clear and fundamental change towards a new approach in European financial market supervision. I embarked in that challenge, conscious of its complexity, but also with pleasure for having the opportunity to contribute to strengthening the European financial system. It is with these same feelings that today, 10 years down the line, I will reflect on how ESMA's role has progressively evolved into one of an established and recognized European authority. Considering some of the uphill battles that are still in front of us, I want to also contemplate what might lie ahead for ESMA after I switch off the light in my Paris office for the final time this week. And I'm actually indeed now in the Paris office. ESMA was set up as part of the European system of financial supervision based on the recommendations back in 2009 of a high-level committee chaired by Jacques de Larosière. It was already mentioned that David was the rapporteur and very influential in its results. These recommendations were meant to overcome the issues encountered with building a single market for financial services under the coordination of the previous level 3 committees and in particular ESMA's predecessor, CSER. The power and governance of CSER and the other level 3 committees were inadequate to deliver on these tasks, and when confronted with the dramatic consequences of the financial crisis, member states were at a crossroads. Strengthen European regulation and cooperation, or further entrench themselves behind national lines. We know what the final decision was. ESMA was therefore established with strong, but at the same time, we can say it today, rather vague expectations. Inspired by the principle of subsidiarity, co-legislators entrusted ESMA with supervisory and active market monitoring tasks, which were regarded as being best dealt with at European rather than at national level. ESMA would also be responsible for setting out measures to implement the then new financial markets legislation and to ensure its converged supervision. And yet, notwithstanding such a broad mandate so clearly enshrined in our founding regulation, I can neatly recall the somewhat tangible uncertainty that welcomed me upon the first confirmation hearing in front of the European Parliament in February 2011. I was under the impression that some were still unsure as how this newly created body would work in practice. And as it often happens, the abstract mandate of an authority seldom defines its role in practice. It is rather the day-to-day implementation of that mandate and how it responds to continuous challenges which define that role. And so it happened for ESMA. Let me just name 3 examples of areas in which ESMA has progressively strengthened this role within the European regulatory community. Firstly, ESMA's direct supervisory powers in relation to CRAs represented an absolute innovation in the EU architecture of financial supervision. For the first time, an EU authority could directly intervene without the intermediation of national regulators on entities carrying out credit rating activities in the Union. Over the years, ESMA showed its ability to deliver on this important mandate by developing an effective supervisory regime and conducting significant on-site supervisory work, thus contributing to the quality of ratings across the EU. Secondly, ESMA has proved capable of providing swift and timely response to investor protection and financial stability challenges. Most notably, I recall the exercise of our product intervention powers, which resulted in restricting or even banning the marketing and distribution of particularly risky financial products targeting retail investors. But more recently, ESMA's response to Brexit and the COVID-19 crisis showed ESMA's ability to coordinate the action of EU authorities and effectively face what will be remembered as critical moments in the history of EU financial markets and beyond. Thirdly, I want to mention ESMA's work on promoting the convergence of supervisory practices. Back in 2011, we could not have envisaged how effective ESMA's role would become in this area. Today, national securities regulators increasingly seek EU-wide coordination by ESMA within ESMA on areas of common interest as a basis to take their regulatory and supervisory decisions. Moreover, the practice of peer reviews has shown ESMA's ability to provide rigorous and independent assessments of national supervisory practices. With these initiatives, ESMA not only creates a virtuous circle to improve national supervision, but most importantly, it ensures that all national authorities converge towards a common understanding of how EU law should be implemented and adjust their supervisory actions accordingly. Across these and other areas, ESMA has consistently shown that it was capable of rising to the challenge and also becoming a reference point for national authorities in the field of data, economic analysis, and research, and which ultimately supports our supervisory and standard setting activities. The experience of the past years showed that the response to one crisis is in effect the preparation for the next one. When taking office 10 years ago, in the middle of a financial crisis, I would not have imagined leaving office in the middle of another crisis, a health crisis with a heavy financial and economic impact. However, this time I'm confident that Europe's financial markets are more adequately supported by an effective regulatory and supervisory system to face such adverse events. Certainly, part of this confidence stems from the track record that ESMA has built as an authority that is able to weather the storm. However, it is also partly due to three fundamental features of ESMA which I believe should continue to characterize ESMA's focus in the years to come. Firstly, ESMA's European reach is crucial to face the challenges posed by an increasingly integrated EU market and ensure coherent protection for European investors. This is also a critical factor to build the CMU. It is therefore important to achieve a gradual but steady expansion of convergence tools and direct supervisory mandates in order to further strengthen the effectiveness of the EU supervisory system as a whole. This is particularly the case when issues and risks have EU-wide relevance and therefore a stronger role for EU-level supervision and regulation in close cooperation with NCAs is justified. The most obvious example, and it will not surprise you, is of course EU CCPs to be supervised at EU level. Secondly, it is essential to preserve ESMA's independence within a complex regulatory and supervisory system which involves many actors. This is necessary not only to maintain ESMA's credibility as a direct supervisor, but also as a reliable standard setter supporting the development and maintenance of high-quality EU financial markets rulebook. In this respect, it is helpful to recall the words of Michel Barnier, the former commissioner tasked with reforming the European supervisory system during the financial crisis. Speaking at the inauguration event in July 2011 of ESMA, it was the inauguration event of ESMA, he said, and I quote, "This independence is crucial for ESMA's credibility. We will work together, we will support each other, but we will also always respect each other's independence." And that's the end of the quote. Thirdly, it is necessary to build on ESMA's resilience and adaptability in response to two macro trends which will increasingly impact the financial system, and they were also discussed this afternoon: digital finance and sustainable finance. In these areas, we are already very active, but it's important that ESMA continues working to establish high-quality standards and ensures an adequate supervisory response to emerging risks in context of increasing complexity and risk of regulatory fragmentation. This work will place ESMA at the forefront in facing the multiple challenges that will come in these areas for financial markets, such as ESG washing, an even bigger reliance by market participants on technology to run their day-to-day operations, and a change in retail investors' ease of trading facilitated by digitalization. Ladies and gentlemen, as I approach the end of my tenure and see the start of a new decade for ESMA, I can't help but reflect on this time with a sense of pride for what this organization has achieved. More importantly, I reflect upon who made that possible. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the multiple institutions and people who have contributed to ESMA's work in bringing EU financial regulation and supervision to a better place than where it was 10 years ago. I would like to thank our two fellow authorities, EBA and EIOPA, the ESRB, the ECB and the Commission, for the strong cooperation and the sense of collegiality with which we have faced common challenges together. My appreciation also goes to the European Parliament, some of their representatives here today, and the Council for the fair relationship that kept ESMA accountable for its duties. I would like to thank the various stakeholders also here today from the private sector and in particular investors and industry representatives. Your constructive and critical views have helped build much of the rules and initiatives that we have put in place. To my fellow board members and all NCA staff goes my gratitude for having made ESMA a fruitful place of exchange and cooperation. Over the past years, I've experienced firsthand the power of collaboration amongst EU countries and increasing reliance of national authorities on ESMA's coordination role and as a result on each other. And finally, let me really thank also, of course, ESMA staff. If, as I said at the beginning, my time at ESMA remained a pleasure, notwithstanding the sometimes bumpy road, it is because of the committed and talented group of individuals that this organization can count on and the strong support that the ESMA family has always provided to me throughout the years. Thank you very much.
Stephen Mayor, thank you so much. I got a couple of questions for you if we have some time. We're down to a couple of minutes before the end, and we talked a few days ago about this, that savings, European savings, are roughly 40% in bank deposits and only 10% in capital markets. So how can ESMA help to shift that money into capital markets and, as we were talking about, to make it more available to startups and companies that will get the money here instead of moving elsewhere?
I think what I think is very good on the recent plans regarding the Capital Markets Union is that there is now a very clear focus on the household participation retail side. That was not in the earlier version. So I think what is the positive development has been the increased focus on this element. And what we can do as securities regulators is, for example, make sure that there are safe products, that there are with low cost,
transparent,
and that are transparent. Is that choice is easy, that is reliable, and so that is the side where securities regulators can help. And I think that is also recognized that ESMA is working very hard in that area. But an important part is also a little bit more remote from our mandate. For example, financial education can help, explaining, because some of the reason you don't understand why families are doing this, because it would be so logic if you want to save for the longer term, is to participate more in the capital market and buy some shares. But some of it also relates to pension plans, to taxation. And so it's important that we at least also make that point that these other areas are important. But then it's for these other actors in the world to act and to improve that.
I think, as you mentioned on a wider level, the relationship has evolved between ESMA and the national regulators. You see now there's an increased willingness and acceptance of ESMA as a sort of a central authority on certain matters. That's rather promising for a capital markets union, isn't it?
Well, I think it's important to I think it was Niamh Moloney making that point also in the first session. We have already progressed a lot with, let's say, the union part being more converged. And so, and there we are progressing further. We need to do more convergence. But there's also a lot of issues still on limited capital market activity at a national level. And that is the reason for emphasizing so much this point around retail participation, pension plans, financial education, making sure that households participate more, because you can harmonize and standardize what you want, but if there is an inherently low capital market activity at national level, there will still be limited impact. And therefore, we need to work, and of course, we need to do our side. That is our mandate, and I think we are progressing. We have progressed very well on the convergence part, but there are some other elements that also need to progress.
Now you go back to the Netherlands.
Well, physically, it's wonderful to be here.
Yes.
Even it's very good to be here in the offices. I think we all miss our office life, and it is good to see you here in person rather from
likewise.
I see a few, but of course it's all very limited, but that is very good.
But you stay active in the same sort of realm when you go back.
Yes, so
right?
I will by the end of this month, when I end, I will start subsequently the next day on the 1st of April at the central bank, the Dutch central bank, the Nederlandse Bank,
right,
and become a banking supervisor.
And probably a good source of information for ESMA in the future as well.
Well, I think it was very good also to, we know that Andrea Enria was there. He have also emphasized, and he did it also in the panel, how important transparency is. So I think these worlds are much closer to each other than we sometimes think.
Stephen Mayur, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for chairing the day today. It was a very good event. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for being part of this, to all the speakers, to all of those who sent in questions, and keep on sending out your tweets. At ESMA Comms is one of them, and also, of course, ESMA 10 years. ESMA 10 years. One thing I might mention in a final comment, final thought. I'd like to mention final thoughts at the end about getting started, as ESMA did, and sticking with it. And this is from Amelia Earhart. And she said, the most difficult thing is the decision to act. And the rest is mere tenacity. And I think that's what we've seen by ESMA.
It is very, regulators typically get into trouble because of inertia, not being active enough. And so I think that is a philosophy that we have in ESMA. It is, of course, you should be rational, you should be well documented, but you should always realize hardly ever a regulator comes into trouble because of inertia, it's because of lack of action. And so that's an important mantra for regulators.
A good thought.
Yep.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone. Happy anniversary, ESMA.